Chapter 479. Stephanie Meyer makes vampires sparkle. Wednesday, December 25, 1996. Peter's Basilica Vatican City Atlantis, DEFCON status. 327% next up. Ed, the singing vampire John Paul and Samuel stood together up on the balcony in St. Peter's Basilica. The conference had adjourned for the time being, with a lot of people wanting to take a break for Christmas anyway. What the various clergy weren't sure about, however, was whether it would resume, as it was fairly obvious that no permanent solution was going to be reached. If anything, Samuel's beliefs would just serve to create a fourth Abrahamic religion, or at least a major Abrahamic philosophical movement. Samuelism, as it was being called, was starting to make inroads everywhere, particularly among people who had been raised religious and had found the strict dogma distasteful. Supposedly already, a few million people practiced at least a few Samuelist customs, and if that weren't good enough, they were still being recognized as saintly people in their churches, mosques, and synagogues. The strong moral character shown by most Samuelists ensured that the new faith would avoid the persecutions and discrimination usually suffered by new religious sects. Regardless of whether people practiced Samuel's customs, a good 80% of the Abrahamics accepted him for who he was and saw him as an important guide to understanding the Word of God. As a result, John Paul had asked Samuel to stand at his side as he gave the Christmas sermon at the Vatican. It was normally difficult to figure out what to talk about for the sermon. However, this time there was no problem. So many amazing things had happened over the past 12 months that he wasn't sure where to begin. The wizards had been exposed, and he had admitted to the world that he himself could cast spells. Heroes from the Bible had returned in ghost form, and an evil wizard had nearly triggered a nuclear holocaust. The Philosopher's Stone, a magical artifact of incalculable power, had emerged and had nearly been mass-produced by an American pharmaceutical company. And all of this had been because one teenage wizard had been caught on camera by a small American soft drink company filming a Super Bowl commercial. He turned to the crowd and continued his speech. The arrival of a new, more benevolent era will almost always be accompanied by turmoil as the old one is overthrown. You can compare what has happened with the wizards to what happened with the Savior at the end of his life. In both cases, a series of amazing events paved the way for a new, more prosperous and kinder world. However, several of those events were tragic. God sacrificed his own son in order to improve the lives of future generations, and many millions of people had their lives shattered by the events surrounding Judgment Day. However, just as the word of God began to spread throughout the world, making it a better place, the benevolent work of wizards began to make itself known after Judgment Day. God willing, we have made it through the tumultuous early years of the new era. If things continue to go as I hope, we may be on the verge of a long era of prosperity. I have no idea if the events of Judgment Day are the fulfillment of the prophecy in Revelation. I may be a wizard, but I am not an experienced prophet. I have been told that several people in Atlantis are well versed in prophecy and may be able to answer that question. However, they have been ordered not to reveal any prophecies to laypeople, particularly those with religious and theological connotations, unless it is an absolute emergency. I personally hope that it is the fulfillment of Revelation, because if it is so, a long period of prosperity is going to follow, and we will never have to worry about war for a long, long time. As far as the omens surrounding the beginning of the Savior's life go, we all know that Jesus' birth was heralded by a strange light in the sky, the Star of Bethlehem. Now that magic has returned, strange lights in the sky are becoming commonplace and interesting coincidence. Just as the Savior's birth was acclaimed by the three kings, several important political leaders announced the arrival of the wizards to the world. In fact, I found myself in the awe-inspiring position to have been one of those messengers, a position which I do not believe I deserved. Jesus performed miracles almost as soon as he was born, remember the infancy gospels, and so forth. And the wizards started performing amazing feats almost immediately after they were introduced. The parallels are staggering, and it seems almost impossible for it to be coincidence. I cannot help but wonder if the stories of the lion lying down with the lamb refer to what happened over the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, when people from all three denominations converged on the third temple for their pilgrimages under the banner of Samuelism. Jews, Muslims, and Christians, enemies for such a long time, literally slept in tents together in the shade of God's mountain. And the one time a fight broke out, God himself sent an angel down to deal with the perpetrators and stop it. Yes, I know that some people say that there was a wizard behind it. However, there is no proof the wizards did it. Furthermore, even if the wizards did do it, which power inspired them to do it? I encourage all of you, my flock, to keep your eyes and mind open to the marvels which will be revealed over the next few years. Although the kingdom of God may or may not have finally arrived, the kingdom of those whom God has granted amazing powers has most definitively arrived. Treat our new visitors like the awe-inspiring mortals that they are, and we will likely all benefit greatly. Russian Embassy Romania. Halina Zyganova rematerialized into real space with a snap and began looking around the room. Not surprisingly, the first thing she saw were several embassy employees with vacant expressions on their faces. She walked down the hall towards the front desk and approached the robed man behind it. The man looked at her appraisingly. "Welcome to the consulate, ma'am. How can I help you?" Zyganova knew the routine by now. "I'm here because my friend Boris wants a passport." "Do you have his birth certificate and his other documents?" "I do, sir. However, they're pretty old. I hope you can read them." The man behind the desk relaxed now that the guest had passed his challenge. "Welcome to the embassy, Mrs. Zyganova, and Merry Christmas to you." "Merry Christmas to you as well. And unless I'm badly mistaken, we're only a week or so away from a major celebration." The desk man chuckled. "You've got that right. Would you believe we've even got a guy here who's been transforming people into half-vampires? A good third of the crowd has taken him up on his offer." Zyganova flinched. "My husband is already here. Did he?" The man shook his head. "No, he didn't try it. To be honest, he seems a bit weirded out by it. It's understandable, considering that if you lose control and try to feed on someone else, you turn into a monster." Zyganova's response was interrupted by another voice. "Vampires are not intrinsically evil, David. I should know, as I am one. Are the windows closed? I'm hurt by sunlight." The desk man looked around the room. "Yup, you're Edvard right." The vampire emerged from the shadows, and Zyganova saw that he seemed like an ordinary, albeit rather attractive man wearing a Muggle suit. Checking the windows one last time, the vampire nodded. "Yes, I'm Edvard. And I think I underestimated the number of people who wanted to become half-vampires. If I bite anyone else, I'm going to go nuts. You must be Mr. Zyganov's wife, right?" Zyganova nodded. "I am. I'm a bit relieved my husband didn't take you up on his offer. Sleeping with him would be a bit complicated." Edvard laughed. "No, that should not be a problem with a half-vampire. To be honest, I'm a bit surprised he didn't join the club. He's extremely disciplined and would probably be able to resist the—" The vampire's response was cut off by a whole series of snaps, arriving one after the other. Seconds later, multicolored beams shot down the hall and crashed into a defensive screen the cultists had placed across the entrance of the office the three people had been talking in. Zyganova screamed as she and David brought out their wands. The vampire swore, brought out a gun, and shouted, "Stay behind me. I'm stronger than a normal person and am somewhat resistant to magic. I'll help you deal with these guys." The two witches tried firing a few blasts down the corridor, but they didn't get very far as the force field stopped spells in both directions. Edvard's bullet, however, passed through the shield and was promptly neutralized by a protego. Stalemate, Zyganova thought. I guess we'll have to wait until they get closer." Seconds later, no fewer than 15 men barged down the corridor towards the office. Some were wearing Romanian robes, and some were Romanovs. David yelped and cast a spell which prevented people from making their way through the door. That didn't last long, however, as one of the head Romanovs waved his wand and neutralized not just David's spell, but the spell preventing curses from crossing into the office as well. Both David and Zyganova lanced out with their wands, and a couple of intruders went down. However, it was fairly obvious they were outnumbered. It appeared a retreat was in order here. Edvard took advantage of his lightning-fast reflexes to dodge an attack, an act which caused several of the attackers to gasp in surprise. Glancing at Zyganova, he shouted, "I'll hold them off. Get out of here and warn the rest. Head over to the safe house." Zyganova nodded and dragged David along with her. Free to attack the enemy without having to worry about hurting his own people, he switched the machine gun to full automatic mode and began firing into the crowd. 5 or 6 people went down as a few more spells shot out at him. One hit him in the side, and he went woozy for a second before his magic resistance took over. He recovered just in time to dodge an Avada Kedavra curse. Igor Romanov had hoped to capture all 3 of these fellows and have them tell them where Rasputin was. Ideally, he would have wanted to take Rasputin as well. Unfortunately, the raiding party hadn't expected the embassy to have been compromised. It looks like the surprise was gone. Rasputin would likely be on his guard after this. With both of the tracked Black Guard cultists having lost their signals, he needed to interrogate someone else to see what was going on. This guy would work, he thought. He's attractive and got amazing reflexes, which was an interesting combination. He's somewhat resistant to magic. And he's using a gun, so he's likely not a wizard. He had a suspicion he knew what exactly he was dealing with here. Raising his wand in the air, he waved it in a circle as the man in front of him fell to a bullet. Stephnemiris. The cultist's body began to glow and sparkle, and the cultist began to curse. Realizing what he had discovered, Igor shouted, "Look out, he's a vampire. I just cast a vampire detection spell." The aura next to him nodded quickly. "I'll handle that, Lumos Solaris." A blast of yellow light, stored sunlight from the outside, shot out of the wand and illuminated the room. Faced with his bane, the vampire shrieked, dropped the gun, and began writhing on the floor. Score 1 for people who remembered how to deal with vampires in defense against the dark arts, Igor thought. 3 people ran over to tie up the vampire, conjuring extra strong cords to make sure the well-built man didn't escape, as Igor ordered the rest of the raiding party into the building to search for Rasputin. It took about 20 minutes to search the complex, and the word eventually came back that the rest of the people had fled the coop, probably via apparition. Igor swore and pointed at Edvard. "I should have put up an apparition shield before we got started. Well, I won't make that mistake again. Let's take this fellow back to base and interrogate him. Anyone have a cloak which we can put over him so he doesn't fry outside en route?" Chapter 480, Ed the Singing Vampire. Thursday, December 26, 1996, Detention Area Atlantis Atlantis, DEFCON status. 328% next up. Mikkel Orvade Haydar Dagher was starting to get worried about the DEFCON readings again. Although they were lower than they had been earlier, when they had been up in the 3s and 4s, Endukaku had been reporting that they had been climbing steadily, without any obvious cause, over the past few days. Just a few days ago, they had been under 2. Now, the latest estimate had it at 2.8. The problem was still centered in the western Black Sea. To the best of his knowledge, there was nothing there. However, events had transpired which were making it increasingly likely that the apocalypsometer was not malfunctioning. Black Fist agents had been sighted in eastern Romania, in the city of Constanta, not far away from the nexus of evil, as Endukaku had taken to calling it. They had apparently managed to take over at least one of the embassies in Bucharest, as well, so they could apparate to it from abroad and go from there to Constanta. Had it not been for the tied-up Muggles they had stumbled across in the embassy upon immediately apparating there, they wouldn't have known that they had apparated into a trap. They would have likely made their way over to the front desk, only to be taken out by the vampire and his two friends. There was still disagreement over whether the nexus of evil was actually hiding a black fist base. Legends existed of private islands Fideliest by their owners, so it was not inconceivable that Rasputin had claimed an island back in the teens or so and made sure no one remembered it. On the other hand, the majority of people argued that there were in multiple bases, one in Constanta and others around the shore of the Black Sea. The existence of multiple bases would explain the rapidly worsening DEFCON readings, and it would explain why the center of the problem appeared to be in the Black Sea itself, in between all of them. Rasputin was getting increasingly bold, Dagger mused. For some bizarre reason no one could fathom, he had kidnapped Hugh DeLorean and nearly caught both Flamels. Dagger couldn't imagine why Rasputin would want all three of them, and neither could Flamel. Dagger's initial assumption that Rasputin had been after the stone didn't hold water, as Flamel pointed out. Combine that with the fact that Rasputin had demanded that Flamel not produce stones, and most of Atlantis was baffled. There were other issues in the world, of course, but for the time being they were being placed on the back burner. Intelligence had reported that Sophia Dippet had just sent a large donation to Lou Herald Pharmaceuticals, formerly known as Herald Green. It was obvious that she was trying to urge them to reconstruct the stone from whatever detritus the American agents had left behind. She would likely be disappointed, however, as both Radner and Ariadne had told him that there was absolutely no way they'd be able to reconstruct anything. The agents had been quite thorough. The war between Círdan and Nestor was getting worse. Basilisks, manticores, acromantulas, and other creatures were accidentally being transported to the main front on Círdan. It appeared that Andrea Marcali had resigned herself to the fact that she wouldn't get American support and decided to get creative. Dagher suspected that Círdan wouldn't be able to last much longer. The Yahoos had taken complete control of the southwestern part of the island and were threatening to march on Círdash. With limited Muggle technology in their hands, an individual Muggle likely wouldn't be able to do much. Throw in a few tens of thousands, however, and things got tricky. There was reportedly a spell which would exterminate Muggles, but use of such a spell would almost certainly get the Círdani leaders executed for war crimes. Italy also was having problems. A strong secessionist movement had abruptly started brewing in the southern half of the country, and to make matters worse it looked as if many of the missing wizards from the ministry had defected to the south and were now consolidating their power. The Liga Nord, the peninsula's northern independence movement, was all for this. With the Liga Nord in control of the north and secessionist gangs in the south, Rome had its hands full and didn't have wizards it could rely on. Dagger pushed all of those thoughts out of his mind as he and at least 10 other people made their way into the interrogation chamber, which was holding the captured Black Fist vampire. Although Edvard had been administered Veritasrum, the vampire had been quite cooperative up to this point. It was obvious that he didn't want the wizards hitting him with sunlight again, and considering that the interrogation chamber had windows and Atlantis was on the surface, all the questioners needed to do was tie him up and shove him into the sunlight. The interrogator nodded as Dagger walked into the room. "We're ready to begin, sir. We've hit him with a bunch of stunning spells as well as Veritasrum doses, both for his good and ours. We don't want him thrashing around, falling into the sunbeams, and frying himself. You wouldn't believe how strong this man is." Dagger grunted. "I'm not surprised. Vampires can be tough to deal with, especially if they turn bad on you. I take it he's still behaving." "Yes, sir. I can tell he wants to get out of here, but he knows there's no way he's leaving here with the sun out. Maybe he figures that if he behaves well, we'll let him off easily." Another of the Auras snorted. "Let him off. He opened up on us with a machine gun." The vampire rolled his eyes. You attacked us first. We did it in self-defense. Dagger waved him off irritably and sat down across from the prisoner. Spare us the philosophical discussion, Edvard. We need to talk to you about your friend Rasputin now. Do you know who I am, Edvard? Edvard nodded. I do. Your grand mugwump Dagger, are you not? Yes, I apologize if we've done you any harm to this point. That blast of sunlight must have hurt, I suspect. The vampire winced. It did, sir, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't do it again. We won't, Edvard, unless you force us to. At any rate, let's talk. You work for Rasputin, right? Yes, sir. Where is he, and what are his plans? And why is he recruiting vampires? Edvard shrugged. I haven't seen him much. He generally visits every so often, welcomes in the Black Fist members as they arrive, and shuttles them off to the island. He's recruited my people so we can make them half vampires and give them some extra stamina and faster reflexes. Several auras began muttering to themselves uncomfortably. Dagger knew enough about vampires that Black Fist half-vampires could be a problem, particularly if they were spellcasters. Cautiously, he asked, You're making people into half-vampires? Yes, sir. How many vampires are working for him, and how many people have your kind modified? Edvard looked angry for a moment, and Dagger kicked himself for using the words your kind. However, the prisoner answered the question. We've got a few vampires interested in Black Fist, but I'm the only full member. I've done all the conversion, and so far I've transformed about 50 wizards and 80 muggles. Igor Romanov swore. 50 vampire wizards. Wonderful. Edvard continued. I administered the bites, and the new half-vampires are recuperating on the island right now. I've paired them up so they can watch either in case they start to get too attached to their new impulses. Dagger frowned. How many men do you have there? Maybe 400, all armed to the teeth. Yet only a third opted for these vampire abilities. Edvard grinned. I gave them fair warning about what happens when a half-vampire gives in to his impulses. It was only appropriate that they know everything so they could make an informed decision. Dagger breathed a sigh of relief at this. Finding yourself facing 130 vampires was a lot better than having to deal with 400. The Grand Mugwump went on. All right, so now we know about the vampires. Now to Rasputin. Where is Rasputin now, and what island are you referring to? What is Rasputin's plan, and why did he threaten the British Minister of Magic? There was a long pause, and the vampire's face grew pale. It suddenly occurred to Dagger that the prisoner may not be magically allowed to spill the beans on Rasputin. The prisoner's face contorted as the Veritasarum's demand that he speak his secrets fought with the spell which demanded that Edvard keep silent. Finally, Edvard sighed. It's obvious you're going to imprison me for attacking your men, so I might as well put myself out of my misery and talk. Rasputin has been shuttling the cultists to the island of Buyan so they can protect the island when Rasputin brings back Kashe on New Year's Eve. The auras began shouting at each other in incredulity. Igor Romanov's eyes went as wide as saucers as Dagger raised his hand. Guys, don't overreact. Those are probably code words. He may not be high enough in the organization to know what locations they refer to. The prisoner, who had abruptly begun to age rapidly, shook his head and turned to Igor. No, sir, this is the real thing. Kashe the Deathless has a Horcrux, and that has kept him alive all these years. I can tell you are a Russian, sir. You probably know the tale, or at least the little which has made it to our time since the Black Death. Dagger looked at the prisoner and then at one of the auras. Could he be lying, even under the Veritaserum? The aura shook his head. I gave him enough to make a politician tell the truth. Also, he's aging. That has to be a curse he triggered for speaking the truth. I'd believe him if I were you. Dagger's mind raced as the vampire's hair started to turn gray. They didn't have much time left. Frantic, he yelled at the auras to apply legilimency to the prisoner. It took a good 3 people to overwhelm the vampire's natural defenses, but they eventually made it to the point where they were able to probe his mind. Time ticked by, and Dagger watched as the Legiliments's blood drained from their faces. Finally, one of them shuddered and turned to Dagger. I caught a few shots of Rasputin in there talking to and biting several known Black Fist members. Rasputin seems absolutely convinced that he's going to be able to bring Kashe back and mentions a Fidelius protecting the island of Buyan. Rasputin says he's the gatekeeper or Kashe's secret keeper. He's been the gatekeeper for over 80 years. Dagger didn't like where this was going. Although he didn't know the location of Buyan, he had seen documents deep in the bowels of Atlantis which claimed that Kashe had had a gatekeeper. The hypothesis was that the gatekeeper was the highest-ranking wizard on the Russian leader's advisory board, or equivalent, and it would change only when the wizard died. Upon the gatekeeper's death, the spell would automatically look up the next leader and determine the gatekeeper from that. The vast majority of the time, the gatekeeper probably didn't even know what this mythical island he had dreamed up was referring to. But now, if everything had gone as planned, and Rasputin had died when he was said to have died, Igor Romanov, or possibly Tsar Alexei himself, would have likely qualified as the gatekeeper. However, all of those plans had gone out the window when Rasputin had created his Horcrux. Rasputin would be immortal and the permanent gatekeeper unless that Horcrux was destroyed. Where the Horcrux was, no one knew. Simply destroying Rasputin's physical body would not get Atlantis any closer to Buyan, as it would render the Atlanteans incapable of contacting the gatekeeper. Dagger realized what had to be done. They had to find Rasputin's Horcrux, or at least Rasputin, and neutralize him before he could bring back Kashe. And they had to do it very quickly. This had to be a legitimate threat hell. The return of Kashe would certainly explain how rapidly the DEFCON readings were worsening. He turned and faced the men behind him. "Gentlemen, this is very disturbing. I remember seeing a document in the vaults of Atlantis which supports this man's story. The position of gatekeeper stayed in the Russian cabinet, which is understandable for someone with Kashe's background. It passed to its successor with the death of the previous gatekeeper. Rasputin was part of Nicholas's cabinet, and if he had a Horcrux, so he never died." People muttered in horror as Dagger spun and grabbed hold of Edvard's lapel. "Tell us where Buyan is. Now, what does Kashe want?" Edvard, his voice increasingly hoarse, shook his head. "I can't. He hasn't told anyone until they're en route to Buyan, and once they land on Buyan, they aren't leaving until Kashe is brought back." Dagger cursed silently to himself. Rasputin was playing it smart. Everyone who knew about Buyan was finding himself on Buyan, so no one else could get to him. Edvard continued, "Besides, I wouldn't be able to tell you anyway. I'm not the secret keeper." Dagger didn't like this at all. Turning back to the auras, he told them to Legilimens the fading vampire once more to see if they could pick the location of Buyan out of his head and bypass the Fidelius. A few more minutes went by, and the auras glared at the vampire furiously as the prisoner withered in his chair and finally fell to the floor, dead. There was a flash as his body disappeared and transformed itself into the hideous bat-like shape that was the vampire's natural form. Dagger rounded on the head aura. "Well." The head aura raised his hands helplessly. "As far as I can tell, he was telling the truth. He didn't know. Either that, or he'd been obliviated." "Did he know why Rasputin threatened Flame?" "Shit, did you at least get an idea as to what Kashe wants?" "He doesn't seem to know that either. I'm guessing the only person who does is Rasputin at this point, and he's probably spending most of his time on or around Buyan." Dagger looked around the room and saw the sea of somber faces looking back at him. However, not all was lost, as one man commented, "Actually, I suspect that we do know where Buyan is, at least its general vicinity." Dagger glanced at him. "You do? Where?" The man grinned. "The vampire said Buyan was an island, and that matches the story which has been handed down since the Black Death. If Rasputin is shuttling everyone to this island from Constanta, it would seem logical for the island to be pretty near Constanta. Igor got it immediately and gritted his teeth. It's in the Black Sea. It's got to be. Dagger smiled and punched his fist in the air. And Endukaku's apocalypsometer target is probably pointing right at it. Well done. Igor shook his head. It's useless. We may know where the island is, but without a way to break through the Fidelius, we can't actually go to it. Dagger winced. Damn, Your Highness, you're right. All right, people. Everyone put PN your thinking caps and get to work. We've got 1 week until the end of the world, and we're going to do everything we can to stop it. Chapter 481, Mikkel Oivade. Saturday, December 28, 1996. Muslims for Humans Headquarters location classified Atlantis, DEFCON status. 331%. Next up. Sodomized Hussein Salah Antown figured watched as the Syrian militants unloaded the boxes of fertilizer from the truck. As far as he could tell, everything was there and accounted for. They had enough resources to develop a relatively powerful bomb. The question was, how were they going to deliver it to the Israeli Ministry of Magic and get away with it? Going through the Nephilim was a non-starter. First, there was a reason their group was called Muslims for Humans. Not only were the Nephilim not Muslim, but they weren't even human. Granted, they looked human and could have passed for human had someone shrunk them to half their normal size. However, anyone that big must have come out of a jinn's bottle or something like that. As one would have suspected from infidels, they had no interest in following the word of the prophet voluntarily. Unlike most infidels, however, they were strong enough to wear thick armor most of the time and weren't easy to convince using weapons. This implied that the device would have to be delivered to the ministry using mundane means, which would be extremely difficult. It wasn't as if Muggles never came in and out of the ministry. The building had a secret Muggle entrance which allowed people like Benjamin Netanyahu access to the facility. The problem was that Anton suspected that there were security checkpoints in place inside the Muggle entrance to protect the wizards and any Muggle bigwigs who were in the area. They would have likely been able to fool an Israeli soldier by hiding it in bales of hay and so forth, or disguising it as something else. However, he doubted that the group would have been able to fool the wizards, particularly after the American and Bulgarian ministries of magic had already been attacked. Fortunately, they wouldn't have to rely on the Muggle entrance. One of his colleagues had found herself cursed with a trait which she had been ashamed of at first, but which, thank Allah, would come in instrumental in this operation. Both she and her husband had been worried that they may have inherited some of the wizarding genes and had taken genetic tests to reassure themselves that they were human. He had been human, much to his relief. She, however, had been outed as a Q-only witch. The fact that they had Q-only witch at their disposal made their life much easier. Although she refused to take classes in apparition and other wizarding skills, much to her credit, the fact that she could hold a wand, even though she disliked doing so, would come in handy here. All the Muslims for Humans personnel had to do was waylay a ministry employee who was wearing a burqa, steal her wand, and dress the Q-only witch up in her garb. There were enough religious Muslims in the ministry for this to be doable, and with only the woman's eyes visible, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that the ministry officials wouldn't realize that there was an impostor under the robe. The Muslims for Humans personnel would then pressure the captive ministry employee for information about other entrances, including a few which allowed wizards, widely believed to be anyone with a Q, when it came to spell detection, access to the ministry if they flushed themselves down the toilet. The terrorist would then pose as an ordinary Muggle shopper and buy an extender bag, a bag enchanted with the now ubiquitous extendatant charm. She would stuff the explosives into the bag, how ironic to be using a magical item here, hide the bag under her robe, and enter the ministry through the toilet after hours. She would then plant the bomb in a closet or somewhere appropriate like that, set the timer so it would go off at 8 a.m., and then exit the way she came in. Piece of cake. With luck, the entire facility would collapse. The captive witch would be given the opportunity to flee after the attack, and she would almost certainly take advantage of it. However, all she would do would be to say Muslims for humans had been behind it, which was kind of the point. There were several complications with this plan, however. The first involved how exactly they were going to keep sure the captive witch didn't escape, either by apparition or by hexing her captors. Simply pointing guns at her wouldn't help, as witches could always apparate on the spur of the moment. The guns wouldn't do much good if she disappeared before they could fire. Anton supposed that the Q-only witch could grab her wand after the terrorists had knocked her out. He doubted that she would try to escape without her wand. Another major complication involved the timer. Anton knew enough about magic to know that magic tended to mess with electrical equipment. Although it was extremely likely that the wizards had hacked up the Ministry of Magic so that Netanyahu's computers would not fry when he visited, there was always the possibility that an electronic timer would fail to function properly. Fortunately, there were always analog options, a bit obsolete, but obsolescence was actually a virtue here. There could also be an issue as to where exactly the bomb should be placed. Simply sticking it in the first closet she found wouldn't do any good if all the terrorist blew up was a bunch of brooms. For all Anton knew, most of the important areas of the Ministry of Magic had additional security requirements, which the Q-only witch's newly acquired ID card wouldn't give her access to. She would also likely not have much time to explore much of the facility before planting the bomb. There was another possibility, that she stay behind and detonate the device as a suicide bomber. Neither she nor her husband liked the idea all that much. They were fond of Allah, but weren't that fond of him. Normally, they would have just reassigned the infiltration to someone else who would have been willing to blow herself up. Except there wasn't anyone else. Anton watched as the last box of fertilizer was unloaded, and the terrorist began taking out boxes full of heavy weapons. If Allah decided that it would be impossible or unfeasible for them to break into the Ministry of Magic without alerting anyone, then the Muslims for Humans personnel would start attacking Nephilim with their new bazookas, and so forth. It was fairly obvious that neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians were particularly fond of the giants, and Anton suspected that one or both of them would join him to get the giants out of there. That would likely draw people out of the ministry to defend the Nephilim, which in turn would allow the Q-only witch easier access to the facility. Regardless of how this went, this would be a difficult task. However, Allah often demanded sacrifices from his followers, and this would be no different. Bouillon, at least it was warm, thought Hugh. They could have dragged him over to this island and left him to die out in the forest somewhere. However, they were at least courteous enough to leave him and his rotating guard a tent of their own. They're not going to kill me, he thought, as they obviously want me to create a stone for them. Since they were unable to abduct my master and his wife, they have no other option but wait for me to do it. It would probably be to my benefit not to tell them that I actually can't do it without the instructions in my pensive. He had gotten a brief glimpse of the island before they had shoved him into this tent. It didn't look familiar, which was somewhat surprising, as he thought he knew the area around the Black Sea pretty well. How could someone misplace an island a good 10 miles across? He answered his own question with a frown. Fidelius charm. Kashe must have cast the Fidelius on it and made himself the secret keeper. However, that didn't make sense, he realized. If Kashe were the secret keeper and he wasn't around, how had Rasputin been able to gain access to it? Rasputin and Kashe had never been active at the same time, so Kashe would have never had the opportunity to tell him. The tent flap opened, and Rasputin made his way into the tent. He seemed very excited and was completely unconcerned that Hugh would try anything. The simple truth was Hugh couldn't do anything. 6 people were pointing wands at him, and the tent was blocked against apparition. Rasputin smiled evilly at him. How are you doing, Mr. DeLord? Hugh glared at him. Fairly well, considering you've stuffed me in this tent. The mad monk laughed. Don't worry, we're going to take good care of you. You are going to make a very good hostage, after all. Hugh's eyes shot up. Let me guess. You're going to tell my master you'll kill me unless he gives you a stone. Rasputin smirked. That would be a logical thing for us to do. Indeed, it would. And it would be absolutely barbaric. I thought you were beyond that, but I see you are no better than a 14th century warlord. Rasputin muttered something into one of his attendants' ears, and the man bowed and left. Turning back to his prisoner, he smiled once more. 14th century warlords could do what they did because they had immense power over other people. Why can't I do this when I've got so much power here? Hugh shook his head angrily. He'll never create a stone for you. Never. He sacrificed his own immortality to keep it out of the hands of people like you. Rasputin looked thoughtful for a moment. Suddenly, his grin widened. We will see, Mr. DeLord. We will see. The two men spoke for a few more minutes. Hugh found, much to his dismay, that Rasputin was keeping most of the information very close to his vest. The Russian was being smart, Hugh realized, and smart villains were tough to deal with. Although Rasputin was making sure that Hugh wouldn't escape, he wasn't telling Hugh anything which could have helped his adversary in case Hugh did manage to escape. Hugh sighed. I can't believe you're going to try to bring back Kashi. Although I was too young at the time to remember many of the details, both my father and my master told me about Kashi. My master said that he started working on the Philosopher's Stone, so he could help undo some of the damage caused by Kashi. Rasputin rubbed his hands together as the man came in with a ceramic bottle and two small crystal goblets. Kashi is a misunderstood man, my friend. Besides, I believe I have something for him which will make him look upon me favorably. Hugh jerked his head at the bottle. And what would that be? Are you going to get him drunk? The ministry officials will be all over you. Rasputin shook his head. They won't be all over me thanks to this Fidelius charm. And as far as this little potion goes, I believe you may be somewhat familiar with it. The mad monk grinned like a schoolboy as tilted the ceramic jug and poured a glowing white liquid out into them. Hugh's jaw nearly hit the floor when he realized what it was. Oh my God, is that what I think it is? In response, Rasputin handed one of the vials to Kashi and lifted the other in his hand. I'd like to propose a toast to Dr. Nicholas Flamel, our mutual benefactor. Hugh took a whiff of the potion in the vial and shrieked in horror. It was the elixir of life, all right. Rasputin had a stone. Rasputin nodded at him savagely. Drink up, Mr. DeLord. We've got a lot more where that came from. We don't need to worry about wasting it. Hugh downed the potion. It couldn't hurt, after all. How had he done it? He couldn't imagine his master caving in. Yet that was the only other option, as all of the illegally produced stones had been confiscated. Hold on a second, he thought. That's a decent amount of elixir he's got there. There's no way my master could have recreated the stone and produced that much on such short notice, let alone manage to get it to bullion. This meant Harold Green. Had Rasputin brokered a deal with Harold Green to produce an extra stone and hand it over when no one was looking? It was a distinct possibility, especially if someone from Black Fist infiltrated the company and produced a stone, or stones. Hugh shuddered at thought of a mass-produced philosopher's stone in the hands of a criminal. Rasputin's sinister laugh echoed in the tent as he pointed his wand at Hugh once more. Thank you for allowing me to share the toast with you. Now, if you don't mind, I think I'll obliviate you to make sure that you don't tell anyone about the elixir. British Ministry of Magic. Flamel's aid threw the scrolls all over the place. No, I don't know where they took him. The owls are returning, empty-handed. Flamel swore. Get me the Romanovs. Hell, get me Atlantis. I want 24-hour guards around my wife. Hall of Portraits Atlantis. Dagger looked at Grand Mugwump Zerin's portrait and frowned. What do you mean you can't tell me where it is? You know where it is. You sent everyone over there to take out Kashi. The 14th century mugwump grimaced. I indeed know. However, I'm no longer the secret keeper. I can't tell you. What do you mean? You're no longer the secret keeper. Olga Kashiva told you and died, making you the secret keeper. Zerind looked at him apologetically. Remember the nature of the Fidelius charm, wizard dagger. It has to be stored in a living soul. When I died, I lost my ability to store the secret. Dagger's eyes widened in horror. Oh shit, you're probably right. The position of secret keeper passed to your auras after you died then. I would suspect so. And judging from the fact that you're telling me it's almost 1997, they're obviously dead too by now. Did you jot down any notes about Buyan's location while you were secret keeper? They were put in my pensive, which has almost certainly been erased or possibly even lost during the centuries. All I can say is see if anyone else in this room was in on the secret and took some notes before he died. Dagger looked at the wall full of portraits. That's going to take forever. Zerind nodded. Indeed, it may. However, it's the only chance you've got. The library in the vaults was too extensive for me to pore through everything even in my day. Nowadays, it's probably intractable. Baghdad, dear Death Eater followers. Your moment has arrived. Atlantis may have gotten wind of part of our operation. The time has come for the diversion we've been planning. Execute Operation Nineveh. Good luck, and may Allah be with you. Sincerely, Grigory Rasputin. Chapter 482. Sodomized Hassin. Sunday, December 29, 1996. Presidential Palace Eric Atlantis, DEFCON status. 348% next up. I thought old people didn't know how to use computers. Saddam Hussein was pleased with the way the recruitment of the wizards had gone so far. Most of the members of his new Ministry of Magic were in fact Muslim, just as he had hoped. There were both Sunnis and Shiites in the group, and much to his amazement, they were actually getting along. Perhaps the rumors that the wizards were more tolerant of social distinctions were true. There were several hundred wizards in his service now, and he had given them lavish apartments in a tony neighborhood in Baghdad. Although the apartments were veritable slums compared to the magical buildings he'd read about, they seemed to be pretty grateful. He wondered whether it was time to start picking on Iran and or Kuwait again. He had no idea if the Iranians had wizards. However, he knew the Kuwaiti didn't. That gave him a bit of a tactical advantage. Granted, there was always the possibility that the Americans would try to get involved to maintain their hold on Middle Eastern oil. Hopefully, he'd be able to fend them off by threatening magical attacks on Israel and on American civilians. He caught a brilliant flash of red light out of the corner of his eye and looked up from his desk to take in an amazing sight. One of his Ministry of Magic members casting spells in the corridor outside his apartment. What the hell was going on here? He reached into the desk for a small handgun as he asked one of the wizards for an explanation. The wizard's response was worrisome. Mr. President, stay down. There are Black Fist assassins in the building. They're trying to overthrow you and take control of your oil. Saddam growled. Black Fist? Those Russian crazies. What would they need oil for when they've got magic? I don't know. Now, if you would excuse me, I've got some bad guys to stun. Saddam let the guy continue his fight as he pressed a button on the bottom of his desk. The button was connected to a secret door which led to an emergency exit, to be used in just such a scenario. The wizards couldn't take him out if he wasn't there, could they? There was only one problem. The button didn't seem to work. It must have been shorted out by all of the magic in the corridor, he thought. But if that were the case, why were all of the hotlines on his telephone starting to light up? Hoping that the attackers hadn't blocked his secret exit, he made sure his gun was loaded and headed for a closet. It was a tight fit, but he made it in. He opened the door a crack so he could see out. The fight lasted for a couple of more minutes. Finally, the flurry of colored lights subsided, and 5 people in ministry robes walked into his office. Someone cast a spell, and Saddam felt a brief chill go down his spine. The caster smiled and walked right over to his closet. Opening the door, he smiled. "The palace is secure, sir. The Black Fist members have been run off." Saddam smiled. "That's good news. I'm glad to have you on our side." The wizard saluted and stood aside. "Indeed, sir, you're lucky you recruited us. Now, I recommend you head over to the phone to see what all those messages are about. I'll cast a spell on you to make sure that you aren't disturbed while you do this." Saddam thanked the wizard and began hurrying back to his desk. Virtually every hotline was active now, with the Black Fist people trying to take over the whole country. He reached for the handset as a grinning ministry member pointed a wand at him and spoke 2 words. "Avada Kedavra." Wasn't that? Making sure that the security cameras had been shorted out, the Death Eater shoved the Iraqi dictator's body out of the way and reached for the handset. Chuckling to himself, he lifted the Muggle contraption. "Hello. We've got a problem here. There are people in robes and masks attacking our forces here. It's a surprise assault, and we're getting mowed down. We need help." The Death Eaters stifled laughter as the wizard held up a hand and spoke once more. "Sir, this is Wizard Khan from the Ministry of Magic. I'm in charge of the President's magical guard." "Where's Saddam?" "He's somewhere safe now, where no one can hurt him. We've fended off some attackers and are cleaning up here." The Death Eaters grinned at that. It was the truth, wasn't it? The soldier, on the other hand, spoke quickly. "Khan, do you have any forces you can spare us? We're getting annihilated by what look like science fiction laser blasts." The wizard thought he heard a scream in the background. Feeling a little relieved that everything was going as planned, he considered his response. "Finally, we'd like to send someone down there. Unfortunately, there are attacks all over the country right now, and we're stretched very thin. Furthermore, we're going to need a decent number of wizards here, just in case the bad guys sent reinforcements after Saddam. We may be able to spare 1 or 2 people, but that's it. I'm sorry. You'll have to make do with what you've got." The soldier sounded furious. What good is a ministry of magic if you can't protect the shit? There was the sound of a phone handset being dropped on the floor, followed by several swears and screams. The Death Eater suspected he knew what was going on, and he wasn't surprised to hear someone shout, "Avada Kedavra," on the other end of the line. Seconds later, there was a heavy thump, which was the unmistakable sound of a body hitting the ground. The Death Eater hung up the call. Unless he was highly mistaken, the soldier didn't have much to say any more. White House. Clinton stared at his aide in disbelief. "What did you say?" The aide spoke so quickly and excitedly the president could barely understand him. "Sir, we're hearing rumors that there has been a coup in Iraq. Saddam Hussein is out of power, and there are unconfirmed reports that he is dead." The Secretary of State gaped at the aide. "Who did it?" "We're still not sure. However, there were reports of wizards attacking military bases." The Secretary of State frowned. "Iraq has a volunteer wizarding force, if I recall correctly." Clinton nodded. "I believe so. You think they turned on their Muggle overlords and tried to take over the country, much like what Voldemort did?" The Secretary of State turned back to the aide. "It's a disturbing possibility. Mr. Pike, whose side are the wizards on, the attackers or the defenders?" "From the reports that are coming in, the attackers." "Did they face any magical opposition?" "Very little, if any. It looks like an inside job. They caught the government completely unprepared." There was a flash of light as Persephone Ariadne apparated into the room. Normally, it was impossible for people to apparate into the White House. However, high-ranking Department of Magic officials got special dispensation. Ariadne's face was grim. "They're Death Eaters, or at least the Death Eaters are being framed for it. Word has just come in, Mr. President." Everyone turned to her, and Clinton closed his eyes. "How do you know, Secretary?" Ariadne shrugged. "They set the Dark Mark loose over the presidential palace, sir. What's more, there are rumors that the dark mark has appeared all over the place there. Military bases, oil refineries, major cities. Clinton stared at Ariadne in horror. That's impossible. They've got to be someone impersonating the Death Eaters. The Death Eaters were all destroyed during Judgment Day. Apparently not, sir. There are enough reports of people wearing Death Eater masks to make this plausible. Anyone can wear a Death Eater mask. Yes, but we've got hundreds of attackers here. Unless they've been mass-producing Death Eater masks, we've got to consider the possibility that some Death Eaters were left behind after Judgment Day and orchestrated this. What do you think the odds are that this is Rasputin and not the Death Eaters? I heard you guys talking about him. Ariadne thought for a moment. I'd say maybe 30%. Rasputin hasn't shown any interest in the Middle East. Besides, it would be out of character for him to suddenly show himself now after laying low for so long. Another terrible thought occurred to the president. Could the Black Fist organization, Círdan, or Tsalasia join forces with these characters? Could they be financing this attack? Ariadne nodded slowly. It's a distinct possibility, sir, but we have no way to tell at this point. The Secretary of State chimed in. Are they attacking the oil refineries like Saddam did during the Gulf War? Not yet, sir. However, I wouldn't be surprised if they hold the world's oil hostage to get their point across. The wizards aren't dependent on oil for their power, after all, so they have nothing to lose. Fortunately, I suspect right now they're still consolidating power, so we may have some time to prepare and try to defend the oil pipelines. What is Atlantis doing? Nothing yet. Atlantis is still at high DEFCON 3. However, they are watching the situation closely. What do you recommend we do? Ariadne paused for a moment, then sighed. Latest reports have the DEFCON meter at 4.8%. The barrier for Atlantis intervention is DEFCON 2 or 5%. At the rate things are going, this could very easily hit DEFCON 2, at which point Atlantis gets involved. I'd recommend a draft of all capable wizards to be supervised by my department under DEFCON 2 and by Atlantis if DEFCON 2 or higher. We won't deploy them until we have no choice. Clinton nodded. Make it so. Do you think that this will go all the way to Judgment Day again? Ariadne shuddered. I doubt it. Sir Iraq isn't a nuclear power, and we need nukes and other weapons of mass destruction to get the situation dangerous enough to threaten mankind as a whole. That's a good thing, because we will not be able to use the Judgment Day protocol again for another 4.5 years. The President told the Secretary of State. Have the news media already found out about this? The Secretary of State nodded. I sure hope not, Secretary Ariadne. Ariadne looked at her feet in shame. CNN's website just broke the story, including the fact that wizards are involved. There are reports of panic buying all over the world. We tried to obliviate people, but they got it onto the internet. And once it's on the internet, you know what happened last time. Shit, Hall of Portraits Atlantis. The late Grand Mugwump Chen, 1421-1527, looked at Dagher apologetically. Yes, I supervised a mission to Buyan to try to find Kashe's Horcrux. I jotted down some notes about its location shortly before I launched it in 1494. How did you find out about it? A document of the late Grand Mugwump, Zerin's, which was in my predecessor's possession. Dagger looked at him hopefully. Do you think you would be able to identify this document? Chen shook his head. I doubt it's still around, and if it is, it's in the vault where... Dagger finished his statement. There is so much junk it will be hard to find it. I'm amazed Dialanis was able to find Nohapishtin's work about Judgment Day. Chen chuckled. I'm not. Judgment Day was a rather big event, and as you know, there's a whole section devoted to the 2 Judgment Days. Dagger bit his lip. 3. We had one 6 months ago. Chen's eyes widened. God help us. You'd have figured out we'd learn from these mistakes. Well, apparently we don't, and we don't have time to chat about Judgment Day or go through the whole vault. This means the only chance we have is to try to find documents outside of Atlantis, which means visiting your colleagues' homes. We'll start with yourself. Did you jot down any notes about bullion, which we may be able to find? Chen nodded. I did, but I put them in the pensive, which has likely been erased and reused. I know. All right, think back to some of the people you spoke with and sent to bullion. Were any of them famous? Did they have estates somewhere where they wrote diaries which may have contained this information? If they wrote entries while they were secret keeper, we may be able to not only get the information, but become secret keepers now that he's dead. Chen thought for a moment. I only remember a few people. Charles St. Pierre, Lone Wolf, Nicholas Flamel, John. Dagger abruptly held up a hand in amazement and hope. Nicholas Flamel. Did you say Nicholas Flamel? Chen nodded. Indeed I did. The reason I remember him was because he was supposedly over 140 at the time, but he didn't look a day over 60. I wish I could have aged like him. Hell, there were jokes running around that he actually had a philosopher's stone. We brought him along because he was one of the few people left who dated from Kashe's time and remembered what Kashe did when he was active. Dagher was speechless. He couldn't believe his luck as he reasoned it out himself. Olga Koskieva tells Zerend. She dies, making him secret keeper. After he dies, Zerend informs Chen in writing. That makes Chen a secret keeper. Chen tells Flamel, and Flamel outlives him, which means... Thanking Chen profusely, he spun on his heel and raced towards the door. He now knew why Rasputin had targeted Flamel, and the other two ancients, considering that they would likely have become secret keepers had Flamel died. And he also understood that Rasputin almost certainly knew by now that the Flamel kidnapping attempt had failed. This meant that Rasputin would have to try again at some point, using one of the people not yet on bullion. Rasputin had targeted Flamel because of what Flamel knew. Rasputin knew that Flamel could allow the world access to bullion. He raced down the corridor and nearly collided with three of his aides who had been running in his direction. All four men went down in a jumble of robes. One of the aides spoke first. Sir, thank God we found you. We've got a problem. Dagger bellowed right over him. Get Nicholas Flamel over here now. To his amazement, the aide shook his head. I'm afraid we don't have time for Dr. Flamel right now. The Death Eaters have re-emerged and taken over Iraq. Dagger froze. What? Chapter 483. I thought old people didn't know how to use computers. Monday, December 30, 1996, British Ministry of Magic London, United Kingdom, Atlantis, DEFCON status. 250% next up. Is there a draft in here? The transparent bubble appeared around Nicholas Flamel with no warning, neatly slicing the table in two. The British Minister of Magic looked around the room in horror and found the expression on his face mirrored on those of his colleagues. Flamel was the first to speak. I sure as hell hope that I've got a malfunctioning ring. Please don't tell me that this insanity in Iraq has gotten Atlantis to DEFCON 2. I've only got a few years left, and I was really hoping for a more peaceful retirement, especially after Judgment Day. The Deputy Minister of Magic shook his head. I'm afraid not, sir. The apocalypsometer just hit 5%. Panic is starting to grip the us, and oil prices have risen to $150 gallon as refineries all around the world are starting to hoard the stuff. A few aircraft carriers have left the United States and headed into the Atlantic, ostensibly for security measures. The Middle East looks like it's about to explode. Iran has started to deploy troops over to the border and is requesting assistance from Atlantis. And now that we're at DEFCON 2, they're going to get it. Flamel grimaced. Wonderful. Who's been sent over there? If it's the 2nd Division of the Standing Army, that's Dumbledore's army, and I would have known about it. It's the 1st Division, sir, the Durmstrang Battalion. It's being headed by Stanislav Drakel, who, as you know, showed promise in the careers. Not Karkaroff. The aide shook his head. Dagger doesn't want any former Death Eaters anywhere in the area. I think he's being paranoid, but I figure he knows what he's doing. I understand. How's Israel reacting to all of this? Israel, strangely enough, appears to be unchanged, at least on the surface. However, I cannot help but suspect Mikkel Oved is doing something in case the Iraqi wizards head in their direction. Are the Nephilim still maintaining control over there? As far as I can tell, yes, which is a miracle in and of itself. Then again, when you've got wizards backing up a bunch of 4-meter tall people, you've got a pretty effective deterrent. I assume the United States has asked Heseltine to join another coalition against the Iraqis. They haven't yet, but we can assume there's going to be a formal invitation soon. What's interesting here is that this is going to be a very widespread coalition, at least at the start, since the Death Eaters are everyone's enemy. The Russians are actually backing us for a change, as are the Germans and Chinese. The Saudis are flaming mad as well. Flamel nodded. That goes to show, since the Iraqis just gave the former Saudi Minister of Magic the proverbial finger. Has anyone started sending weapons to Iran, yet in case the Iraqis do invade? Not yet, sir. There's still bad blood between the United States and Iran, as we all know. It looks like the United States doesn't know what to do at this point. They're trying to choose the lesser of two evils, and they don't know who that is yet. Flamel looked at his feet, shrugged, and took off the ring, causing the Atlantis bubble to wink out. Sitting down heavily in a chair, he scratched his beard. I can't imagine why this has gotten us up to DEFCON 2. Had I been a betting man, I'd have figured this would push the apocalypsometer to 3% or so, not 5%. Something else is going on, and I want to know what it is. A voice behind him answered that question. Dr. Flamel, I believe we can answer that question. Everyone spun as a large group of Atlantis representatives made their way into his office, followed by, oh great, a large number of Muggle and wizarding reporters. The vast majority of them were high-ranking auras, undoubtedly being called upon to spearhead the attack on the Death Eaters. What was most surprising, however, was the person leading the delegation, Ambassador Dialanis. Flamel picked up a ministry report on the Iraqi takeover and shook it angrily. Anastasios, what's going on here? Why are all you guys here instead of in Atlantis trying to get rid of those idiots in Baghdad? Dialanis looked grave. Dr. Flamel, we have reason to believe there are two threats at this point. The first, as you know, is the Iraqi incident. There is a second, however, which has the potential of being significantly more serious. The room was silent for a good 20 seconds. Finally, Flamel said, You've got to be kidding me. What's possibly worse than the return of the Death Eaters? Wait a minute, did you lose the damn resurrection stone, giving them a chance to bring back Voldemort? I told you to keep. Dialanis cut him off. The resurrection stone is safe, Dr. Flamel. However, the primary threat isn't Voldemort. We believe we know what Rasputin's plans are, and we have about 24 hours to thwart them. And for that, we need your help. You're the only person who can do this. Flamel stared at the former Grand Mugwump incredulously. Rasputin can wait until we've gotten rid of these guys. Aye. Dialanis interrupted once more. Rasputin has gone to the secret island of Buyan so he can bring back Kashe. We have testimony under Veritaserum that this is true. You do remember him, do you not? No one moved for a good 2 minutes, and Flamel stared at Dialanis, absolutely thunderstruck. The Iraqi news bulletin fell from his hand as Flamel shook his head slowly. This cannot be happening. No way. You've been confounded. Dialanis shook his head. The evidence is overwhelming, sir. I suspect this has been in the cards for a while, and according to Grand Mugwump Zerind Kashe, can only be brought back in a 12-day period centered on New Year's Eve. Flamel exploded. Zerind is dead. Has Dagger been chatting with the portraits again, trying to get inspiration for throwing the Death Eaters out of Iraq, is he? One of Aura's stepped forward. Dr. Flamel, we think we know why Rasputin tried to attack you. It only makes sense if he is indeed trying to bring back Karshe. He believes that you may know the location of Buyin and are a secret keeper for that fact. If he takes you out, plus anyone who could possibly have heard the secret from you, he makes it so we can't interfere with his operation. Is it true? Are you a secret keeper for Buyin and Karshe? Flamel paused once more as the cameras snapped everywhere. Finally, I do know where it is, and I was sent there back in the late 15th century by then Grand Mugwump Wu Chen. And the aura talked right over him. Would you be able to see on a map, even if it is not normally visible? Flamel, still somewhat confused, nodded. Yes, I would. Let me guess. The risk of these reports being true is high enough that Dagher has no choice but to divide his forces and send some over to Buyin to deal with Rasputin. And in order to do so, he needs me to blow the whistle on the island. Dialonis nodded. I'm afraid so, Dr. Flamel. The head aura reached into his robe and pulled out a large map of the Black Sea area with a thick grid of longitude and latitude lines. Where is it, Dr. Flamel? Flamel looked over the map as everyone held their collective breaths. Finally, he jammed his wand down on what appeared to be an empty spot. There. The island of Buyin is right there. Cameras snapped like firecrackers as he removed his wand. When his wand was gone, everyone saw a small island sitting precisely where the wand had been. The aura grabbed the map and checked out the coordinates. 44 degrees, 2 minutes north, 29 degrees, 57 minutes east. I think we've got it. Flamel shook his head. You've got it, all right. However, you can't tell anyone because you're not the secret keeper, and I highly doubt you're going to kill me to spread the word. It has to come out of my hand or out of my mouth. Dialonis stared at the floor in dismay. I thought would be a problem, Dr. Flamel. We've got to think. Suddenly, one of the news reporters at the back of the room raised her hand. Flamel, increasingly irritated, called on her. It took a bit of prodding, but the reporter eventually spoke up. If I would make a suggestion, I work for the Daily Mail and am somewhat familiar with computers. The Daily Mail has a website. If I get you in touch with our software hackers, would you be willing to enter the information onto the web page? Unless I'm mistaken, anyone given access to the web page will be able to read it. It will be the Super Bowl breach all over again. Flamel laughed and slammed his fist on the table. Perfect. Tell every single person who is to set foot on the island to go to that web page. Do you think it will be able to handle the traffic? The reporter gritted her teeth. I hope so, Minister. Flamel walked over to her and shook her hand. Congratulations, Ms. Rowling. You may have just saved the world. He started making his way out of the room and called back over his shoulder. On my orders, all of Dumbledore's army is to start heading over to Buyin. Anyone who is of age in that organization, either the original school organization or the Hogsmeade version, must go to that island within 12 hours or be subject to imprisonment in Azkaban. Anyone who's not of age stays put. It's time for a military draft, and if Atlantis has a problem with it, Dagger goes through me. Got that? Dialonis smiled. I would have suggested something similar myself, Dr. Flamel. The British officers nodded and started issuing the appropriate orders. Cameras flashed as Rowling and Flamel started heading towards the exit. Suddenly, however, Rowling stopped in her tracks with a worried expression on her face. Flamel looked at her uneasily. Shit, there's a problem, right? Rowling blinked and shook her head. Not really. It's just that someone I know may be affected by this. Flamel threw up his hands. We can deal with that later. Let's get Buyin on the map. Again. Flamel headed off, leaving Rowling frozen for a few moments. Slowly, sheepishly, she turned to the rest of the reporters and explained why she was so uneasy. Hermione Granger is going to war. Muslims for Humans headquarters. Salam Anton looked at the news report in disbelief. The Death Eaters, the sworn enemies of the human race, had dared take over a Muslim nation. They would pay for that. Allah willing, they would pay for that. He stared screaming to the rest of his colleagues. Change of plans. Forget Israel, the Israelis can wait until later. We're only a few hundred miles from Baghdad. We're going to blow the crap out of those Death Eaters. Everyone cheered, and no fewer than 3 people admitted that they had hoping for this new order to come through. Chapter 484. Hermione drafted. Monday, December 30, 1996, suburbs of London, United Kingdom. Atlantis DEFCON status. 250% next up. I knew elves had some fight in them. 5. Hermione had told Ron a lot about Nirvana, the Buddhist version of paradise. However, her description didn't seem to match what was coming out of the radio in her mother's 1992 Toyota Corolla. And I forget just why I taste oh yeah. I guess it makes me Smiley found it hard. It's hard to find oh well, whatever, never mind. Ron held onto the door handle for dear life as the car spun around a corner. Hermione, be careful. Someone almost hit us there. Hermione didn't take her eyes off the road. I'm doing what I can. However, be reasonable. There's only one first drive after you've gotten your driver's license, and I'm going to make the most of it. Besides, you should be accustomed to cars by now. You flew one into Hogwarts. Ron's face was turning green. Yes, we did that. However, I didn't know what we were doing, and we didn't have other vehicles and buildings we could hit. Can you slow down, Hermione? I'd rather ride a dragon. Harry chimed in diffidently from the back seat. You know, Hermione, he's got a point. Ron's never been in traffic before. Besides, you're not exactly an experienced driver, and there is slush on the ground. Hermione sighed, turned down the volume, and slowed down. Oh, fine. Better be safe than sorry, at least until I put some charms on this vehicle. The 3 spent the next couple of hours traveling around London. Hermione showed Ron some of the lesser-known sights. Despite all that had happened over the past year, Ron still wasn't entirely familiar with Muggle London. Nor was Harry, for that matter, since he had been cooped up in the Dursleys' house most of the time. All of the Christmas lights were still on, and people were stampeding into stores in the annual ritual known as the returning of dud Christmas presents. Ron pointed at a banner in a toy store's window and fell over laughing. Look at that. Pound 149.95 for a wizard chess set. How much do they go for in Hogsmeade? 9 galleons or something like that. We can make a lot of money off this, Harry. Hermione rolled her eyes. Ron, don't you realize that probably every single wizard in this country is thinking the same thing? Besides, it will never work now that Hogsmeade has lowered the security and let Muggles back in again. At least for now. I can't imagine them raising the barriers once more now that the Death Eaters have taken over Iraq. However, what law requires that people act rationally? She looked at her watch and battered analog Timex, which had only 3 hands. It's starting to get a little late. I think we'd better head home to my parents' house. You 2 won't mind sharing a bed, won't you? We've got you set up in the guest room. Ron's eyes narrowed. Can't you just cast a spell which will turn 1 bed into 2? The Geminio spell is legal again, is it not? Hermione shook her head vehemently. In theory, yes. In practice, where are we going to put the 2nd bed? The house isn't exactly a monstrosity now, is it? Then again, we could always put the 2nd bed outside, I suppose. Ron shivered at the thought. And have me freeze to death? I don't think so. The 3 students wended their way back through the streets of London and turned onto the street leading to Hermione's house. Harry saw immediately that something strange was going on. There were several television crews parked on her block, and she saw no fewer than 3 brooms outside. Cocking his head at Hermione, he asked her if she had been expecting guests. Hermione shook her head, as puzzled as the other 2 were. I haven't. I wonder if they're going to interview me about the attack in Iraq. Ron snorted. But you don't know anything about Iraq. I know more about it than you do. Ron, in all fairness, however, we are pretty good people to talk to about the Death Eaters. I'll try to get rid of these people in a hurry so we can break out your new Muggle Christmas presents. Ron gaped at her. I've got Muggle Christmas presents. Whoa, now those would be worth something in the wizarding world, at least as curiosities. Hermione parked the car in the driveway and began fumbling for her door key as she and her two friends made their way to the door. However, she didn't need them, as her mother opened it before she got there. Mrs. Granger looked serious. Hermione, an owl stopped by our house and delivered you some mail. It's marked with the seal of the Aura Office of the Ministry of Magic. I haven't opened it, but I've got the impression that it's very important. Hermione blinked. The Auras want to talk to me. It seems like it, Hermione. Have you done anything wrong? All three kids looked at each other and shook their heads as Hermione said, I don't know of anything, Mum. Harry suddenly thought of something and began to speak. Mrs. Granger, did Ron and I get letters as well? Hermione's mother shook her head. No, just her. What are all these people here for, Mrs. Granger? I don't know, Harry. They said they would explain what's going on after Hermione read the letter. They claim that they've got some stuff to give her. Hermione led the trio into the kitchen. Who's here? What am I getting? I don't know what you're getting, Hermione. However, there seem to be a lot of people here. J.K. Rowling has come. The man with the fake eye is here. Hermione grunted. Alastair Moody. That's him. There's a bloke named Aberforth as well. He's the old headmaster's brother, right? Ron nodded. Yup, that's him. I liked Albus better. I see. What's most surprising of all is that the Minister of Magic has arrived here in person. At least, I think he's the Minister of Magic. His name is Nicholas Flamel, and he claims to be 6 billion years old. The three kids stared at each other for a moment before Hermione spoke. What is Dr. Flamel doing here when he's supposed to be taking care of Iraq? Is he going to give me a present too? To everyone's astonishment, Hermione's mother nodded. He says he has something for you and that he doesn't have much time. He also wants you to open the message as soon as possible so everyone can discuss its implications. Hermione didn't like this. Implications. That's what he said. Now we don't want to keep the minister waiting, particularly if what he says is true and Voldemort's men are on the loose in the Middle East. The letter's on the table, next to the washing machine. Have you read it, Mum? Hermione's mother winced and shook her head. No, Hermione. I don't want to open official wizarding correspondences, which, for all I know, will explode if the wrong person reads them. Vaguely unsettled, Hermione walked over to the letter and opened it. She started scanning through it, and her eyebrows suddenly shot up in shock as Rowling, the other reporters, and the wizards began making their way into the kitchen. The room was soon packed with people. Harry waved his hand at her to get her attention. Hermione, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a dragon. Hermione lowered the letter and began shuddering. This can't be happening. This cannot be happening. Ron rounded on her. Hermione, what is going on here? I haven't seen you this frightened since we caught you in the bathroom with that troll. The voice that answered was Alastair Moody's, and it was surprisingly gentle. It's an order for a wizarding military draft, son. All Dumbledore's army members aged 17 and up have been ordered to report to the Ministry of Magic by 7 p.m. today so they can be briefed and transported to the war zone. Failure to do so will result in imprisonment in Azkaban. Miss Granger is of age, so off she goes. And yes, she has to leave within 60 minutes. Hermione's mother shrieked in horror. You're sending my baby off to Iraq. You can't do that. Moody rounded on her. She is no longer a baby, Mrs. Granger. She is considered a full adult in the wizarding world, and she has taken 5.5 years of defense against the dark arts. I should inform you that Dumbledore's army is now considered the 2nd division of the wizarding standing army. Atlantis has us in reserve precisely for situations like this. Hermione has enlisted, and she must therefore serve. Mrs. Granger sounded desperate. She can't serve while she's still in school, can she? Moody wasn't moved. Troops currently enrolled at Hogwarts will serve until the Christmas break ends. Once break is over, They will return to Hogwarts and study triple defense against the dark arts until the end of the year. They will then serve their country once more in the summer, assuming the emergency lasts that long. Ron and Harry started looking at Moody with determination. She won't be alone, Professor. We'll go with her. Moody shook his head savagely. No, Mr. Weasley, you will not. The order specifically forbids the call-up of anyone under 17. The aura turned back to Mrs. Granger, who was sobbing. Mrs. Granger, you can take some comfort in the fact that I will be there with her. I feel like I owe it to her as her teacher. Don't send her to Iraq. She can serve if she has to, but don't send her to Iraq. Send her somewhere safer. What are you going to do with her? Moody shook his head. You don't want to know, and besides, I wouldn't be able to tell you anyway. Mrs. Granger turned to Flamel. Can you get her special dispensation? She's done wonders for Muggle-Wizard relations. Flamel shook his head. Much as I would like to, I have to be impartial as minister and therefore can't make any exceptions. I'm sorry. She has to serve, just like everyone else. If it makes you feel any better, I'm going as well. Ron blinked at him. But you're the minister of magic. You have to stay behind and keep everything under control. Flamel nodded. I'm aware of that. However, the mission Hermione, Moody, and I will be going on requires expertise which only I have. Besides, I've been to this place before, something virtually no one of this generation can claim. Who's going to be running the ministry while you are out, Dr. Flamel? Flamel shrugged as he reached into his pocket and brought out a small box. My wife. She isn't going to be needed at Hogwarts, at least for now. I've been hoping Hugh would take the job, but I suspect Hugh is still incommunicado. Now, Hermione, hear me out. I had intended to give you this later, but considering that your mother will probably kill me, if I don't do it now, I might as well get it out of the way. Would you be so good as to give me a lock of your hair? Hermione's eyes widened as she plucked a strand of hair from her head. Pointing at the box, she asked, My hair? Are you going to be polyjuicing into me? The wizards laughed and shook their heads as Flamel accepted the hair. Still chortling, Flamel tapped his wand to the hair and then to the box. The box glowed like a small sun for a moment, then it faded away. Harry had never seen anything glow that brightly. Whatever was involved was very serious magic. Presenting Hermione with the box, the minister said, It's not polyjuice, Hermione. It's something far more valuable, and you've certainly earned it, considering all that you've done. Suspicious, Hermione took the box and opened it. Inside, it was a small circlet of gem-encrusted gold. The ring took the form of a serpent biting its own tail. Hermione stared at it in disbelief and showed it to the crowd. Oh my God! Oh my God! Ron looked at her in horror. King William proposed. Flamel's eyes widened, and everyone started laughing again. Wiping his eyes, the minister shook his head. Now that eye had never even occurred to me. Go ahead, Hermione, put it on. We hit DEFCON 2 earlier today, so we'll be able to see if it works. Oh, and everyone else get back. The wizards backed off, with Ron and Hermione convincing Hermione's mother to get out of the way. Taking a deep breath, Hermione put the ring on her finger. There was a brief flash of light and a brief cracking sound. When the light had cleared, it revealed Hermione surrounded by a thin, transparent hemisphere. Ron and Harry stared at each other and then at Hermione. When Ron spoke, his voice was filled with awe. Hermione, you've got yourself an Atlantis ring. Moody nodded. And a broken sink. It looks like that barrier cut right through the sink. We'll fix it before we leave. Hermione's mother gaped at her daughter. What is this bubble surrounding her? Hermione explained. It's an Atlantis bubble. I'm flattered to get this. It renders me completely invulnerable to anything short of a direct hit from the Elder Wand or a nuclear weapon. Nothing will be able to hurt me now, Mum. Hermione's mother screamed out in joy and raced to hug her daughter, but she didn't get very far before she crashed into the protective shield and fell onto her rear end. Helping her up, Moody explained. This ring can only be worn by her, and it is one of the greatest rewards a witch or wizard can receive. There are only two drawbacks to the ring. It is completely airtight, which will prevent poisons and gases from harming the wearer. However, the wearer will have to take it off momentarily to replenish his or her air supply. Second, this engagement will be under DEFCON 2 rules. That means she will not be able to cast spells out of the ring unless they are in self-defense. Moody looked at Hermione wistfully. I've been an aura for many years, and even I haven't gotten one of those. Getting one at her age is extraordinary, to say the least. Hermione took off her ring, and the bubble disappeared. Water started leaking out of the sink as her mother raced over to hug her. Soon, Harry and Ron were doing so as well. Harry had a brief vision of Voldemort killing her, and he shook his head to clear it. Paranoia wasn't good in this situation. However, he couldn't help but think that this could very well the last time he'd see her. In this world, at least. Flamel put his hand on Hermione's shoulder. You'd better hurry up. We have to meet at the rendezvous in less than an hour. Let's have Professor Dumbledore give you the sword so you can start packing. There's no time to waste. Hermione nodded and shook the minister's hand. Flamel then vanished as Harry turned to Moody and asked, Sword? What sword? Aberforth Dumbledore's deep voice answered that question as he brought an object out of his robe. This sword, Mr. Potter. Everyone gasped as the lights from a row of Sylvania bulbs reflected off the gems embedded in the sword of Godric Gryffindor. Hermione looked at Aberforth in astonishment. Professor Dumbledore, I'm flattered once again, but why am I being given this? I have a wand, after all. Besides, this belongs to the school, not to me. Aberforth smiled. Yes, and as Gryffindor's head of house, I have a say on who gets it and when. The sword should always go to those in dire need, and if there is any time it should be in the hands of a Gryffindor, it should be now, particularly given the stakes in this mission. Hermione frowned. But won't the sword get in the way? It's big and bulky. In all fairness, Professor, the only thing I can imagine the sword is good for is destroying Horcruxes. Aberforth nodded. Exactly, and that's precisely why you're getting it. There may be up to Horcruxes involved here, and we already know that the sword works well against Horcruxes. As of today, the sword is on loan to you until you return from your mission. These Horcruxes will be difficult to find, and odds are that we won't find them. However, it's better to be prepared in case we get lucky. Mrs. Granger scratched her head. What's a Horcrux? Aberforth shook his head and smiled. You don't want to know, Mrs. Granger, trust me. Hermione nodded and jerked her head at him as she placed the sword on the table next to her. Trust him. Aberforth wished Hermione luck and vanished as abruptly as Flamel had. Moody fixed the sink and followed soon thereafter, leaving Hermione and her friends at the mercy of the reporters. It took a lot of coercion, but eventually Hermione managed to convince everyone that there was no time for interviews. Besides, Hermione wasn't entirely sure where she was going to be deployed yet. Iraq made a lot of sense. However, why would she be going after Horcruxes? Voldemort was already dead. He had no Horcruxes left. By 6:45, Hermione was all packed, and everyone gathered in the living room one last time. Her mother was a little less nervous, considering that Hermione had been given an Atlantis ring. Her father, who had come in during the packing session, had been caught completely off guard, but even he admitted that if Hermione had been called to duty, she had to serve. Harry and Ron spent a good 5 minutes each hugging her, and Ron added a few special treats, which, for the first time in almost a year, didn't earn a reproach from anyone else in the room. Finally, the time had come. Drawing a deep breath and raising the sword of Gryffindor in a solemn salute, she disappeared into thin air, leaving her civilian life behind her. 1857, Zemonde, December 30, 1996, suburbs of London, United Kingdom, Atlantis, DEFCON status. 250% next up. You do realize wizards don't rely on radar. Hermione rematerialized near an old public toilet with Professor Moody at her side. She blinked at him, put down her suitcase, and frowned. Ah, Professor, are you sure we went to the right place? We're supposed to be going to the Ministry of Magic, right? Moody nodded, his artificial eyes scanning the area for watchful muggles. Hermione still couldn't get over how it swiveled in its socket like that, even after having him, or someone who looked like him, as a professor for a year and a half. Seeing nobody other than a stream of wizards and witches heading for the toilets, Moody started stomping his way towards the toilet. This is one of the entrances to the ministry, Miss Granger. It's disguised as an old, out-of-order bathroom. Hermione got it immediately. It's a secret door, sort of like with the Room of Requirement. Sort of. The toilets in there are actually enchanted, so that people who step in them are transported into the ministry. Hermione's nose wrinkled. We flush ourselves in with all of the... Moody chuckled. No, there's no other stuff that goes in with us. Trust me, it's safe. And it isn't going to smell either. Now, if you would excuse me, I'll have to get into the men's line. Hermione took her place at the back of the women's line. If they were going to be flushing themselves in with garbage, these ladies weren't dressed for it. Some of them were wearing some pretty expensive robes, including one woman who looked as if she could have been a model. Now that she thought about it, the woman looked familiar. In fact, unless she was mistaken. She blurted it out, Fleur Delacroix. The woman turned around. Sure enough, it was Bill Weasley's girlfriend. She was wearing what appeared to be a formal Beauxbatons uniform, which seemed more or less appropriate for a military draft. Fleur stared at her. Hermione Granger, is that you? Hermione whistled. Fleur's English had improved greatly. Yes, Fleur, it's me. You were called up as well. Fleur nodded. I'm in one of the Dumbledore's army chapters, just as you are. Besides, I had experience fighting dragons and dealing with danger during the Triwizard tournament. I can only hope that they're not going to have us swim underwater or get lost in enchanted mazes. I'm surprised Harry and Ron aren't here. Oh wait, they're not 17, right? Nope, they're not. Where's Bill? He's already in the ministry. I had an errand I had to run first, so I had to come a bit later. I see. Do you know what you're going to be doing in Iraq? I assume that's where we're going, after all. Fleur smiled. I can't really say. However, I have already been given my instructions. Let's say the powers that be like the fact that I'm partially Vila and that I'm capable of seducing men. Hermione stared at her. But you're already seeing someone. Besides, doesn't that make you feel like a bit of a... well... Fleur actually blushed. Sort of, to be honest. I'm not particularly thrilled about it myself. However, these are troubled times, and we're going to have to do what we have to do. Fleur's face grew serious as they entered the ladies' room. Hermione, we are going to be in serious danger. This isn't going to be a walk in the park or a vacation. Think of it as being on the same level as the Triwizard tournament, which you saw firsthand. However, this time it's for real. In this case, Dumbledore and Madame Maxime aren't going to be around to bail us out if we get caught by Grindylows. If it is our time to go, so be it. Hopefully we'll go out like my fellow Triwizard contestant Victor Crumb, a hero in the careers. Hermione nodded, but she couldn't help think of what happened to the fourth Triwizard champion, struck down unprovoked by one of the nastiest dark wizards of all time. A dark wizard who, for all she knew, could have just resurfaced in Iraq. Not wanting to think about that, she turned to the stall in front of her and watched as the woman before her stepped into the toilet, pulled the handle, and vanished. The toilet transported them into an alcove, which seemed to have originally been designed for Floo travel. What was most unusual, however, about the entrance was the fact that there was a laptop computer staring the new arrivals in the face. Floating next to the computer was a sign which read, "Attention, please read the information printed on the screen to your left. This is extremely important, and it will affect your mission." Hermione looked at Fleur in astonishment. They're using computers in the ministry now. That's progressive. Alastair Moody's voice echoed out from the corridor beyond the alcove. They normally don't use computers, Miss Granger. However, this particular operation requires that some information be conveyed electronically. Read what's on the screen and let's go. Hermione looked at the screen and frowned. It's from a Daily Mail reporter. That's odd. Why would? Oh, Hermione's tongue froze to the roof of her mouth as the highlighted sentence in the middle of screen caught her attention. I, Nicholas Flamel, inform you that the island of Bouillon is located in the Black Sea at coordinates 44 degrees, 2 minutes north, and 29 degrees, 57 minutes east. Fleur gasped, and she wasn't the only one. Shocked comments about Bouillon resonated throughout the alcove as the latest group of travels headed deeper into the ministry. Both Fleur and Hermione turned to Moody. Fleur asked, Professor Moody, is this a joke? There wasn't really an island called Bouillon, was there? And if there had been such a place, wouldn't its location have long since been forgotten? Moody shook her head. It's there, all right. Nicholas Flamel was there over 500 years ago, and as things turned out, he is now a secret keeper for its location. And unless I am very badly mistaken, we're going to be heading over there shortly. Hermione scratched her head. What will we be going to this secret island for? Are we going to gather there as a safe house? Moody shook his head. Far from it. I suspect we're going over there because we're going to have to finish off Rasputin before he brings back Boris Karchay. Hermione stopped short and nearly toppled over as Fleur walked into her. Excuse me, Professor. Are you telling me that the man who triggered the greatest crisis of the last millennium managed to survive? And he's taking advantage of the fall of the Statute of Secrecy to come back and threaten the Muggle world once again? Moody nodded gravely. That is precisely what we are afraid of. We have reason to believe that Rasputin and the Black Fist have gathered a huge force there to hold us off long enough until Rasputin completes the 9-plus-hour ritual required to bring back Karchay. Once Karchay is back, well, you know what he did last time from the play you just put on. Both Rasputin and Karchay have to be stopped and destroyed permanently this time if possible. And to make matters worse, we blew our judgment day on Voldemort, so we won't be able to use it again for another 4.5 years. Fleur put her hands to her face. Merde, this is terrible. Hermione nodded. You've got that right. I take it that's why Atlantis is at DEF CON 2. I highly doubt a bunch of wizards in charge of Iraq would be enough to make it all the way to 2. Moody nodded. You are correct, Miss Granger. The issue with Iraq is of little consequence compared to what could go down if Karchay returns to Earth. The Muggles, of course, are going mad because they're concerned the Middle East will destabilize. They don't realize that if Karchay returns, you can get a worldwide pandemic, which can kill half the world's population or more. Imagine Karchay repeating the Black Death, but this time with anthrax, dengue fever, or Ebola, and taking advantage of airplanes to spread the contagion more easily among the Muggles. Fleur's face was white, and Hermione had the sword of Gryffindor in a vise-like grip as Moody continued. We must not fail here. Do you hear that, everyone? We must not fail. I expect everyone here to lay down their lives to make sure Karchay does not come back, and if he does, that he does not get off that island. Hermione shook momentarily. However, the sword in her hands brought her to her senses. Gryffindors were renowned for their courage, so how could someone entrusted with the sword be allowed to quiver in fear? Everyone was silent as Moody, and the ministry officials escorted them into a large room which Moody explained was normally used as an atrium. The traditional fountain in the center of the room, however, had vanished. In its place was a greatly enlarged image of an ancient map, looking to have been from the 15th century and marked with the initials NIF. Flamel, presumably. It depicted what appeared to be a small island about 15 miles so across, dominated by 2 mountains and a small valley in the middle. Situated behind the map was a podium, and behind the podium was the Minister of Magic. Flamel was speaking, and Hermione listened inattentively. Yes, I have brought you together from all walks of life to confront an evil on the same level as Voldemort's, possibly even worse. When I was in my 20s and 30s, Professor Cachet brought the world to its knees by taking an existing strain of bubonic plague and turning it into the worst pandemic in the history of Europe. Had it not been for the fact that the Norse had already found evidence of the New World, this would have likely gone to Judgment Day. And what's even more frightening is that Cachet managed to pull this off with 14th century Muggle technology. No planes, no genetic engineering. Nothing other than magic. Each of you has something to give here. Some of you are SEALs, very good at infiltrating enemy encampments and taking out targets. Some of you are auras or members of the Order of the Phoenix, with great experience fighting dark wizards like Voldemort. Some of you are members of Dumbledore's army, Britain's newly formed magical militia. If the real-world James Bond exists, he would be in this room right now. And there are Veela among you as well who are hoping to take advantage of the fact that Rasputin is an inveterate womanizer. Hermione turned to Fleur, who was actually blushing. It was obvious what Fleur was supposed to do. Glancing around the room, Hermione thought that she saw a few more Veela in the crowd as well. Let me reiterate what we know. Cachet survived all these years by placing his Horcrux on the island of Bouillon and fideliusing the island's location to himself. When he was incapacitated at the end of the Black Death, the Fidelius charm transferred itself to his most obvious successor, the highest-ranking magical advisor to Cachet's old kingdom in central Russia. This man or woman, called the Gatekeeper, kept the role for the rest of his or her life. When he died, the spell sought out the new ruler and reassigned the Fidelius to the new ruler's chief advisor. This spell continued for the next 6 centuries, and it began applying itself to the head of Russia as Cachet's old kingdom fell under the rule of the Tsars. Normally, this would have assigned the Fidelius to trustworthy individuals such as Igor Romanov. However, Cachet had not considered the possibility that one of his gatekeepers would create a Horcrux and then join the Black Guard cult. Because of this Horcrux, Rasputin never died. As a result, he remained the gatekeeper long after the Tsars, and eventually the Soviet Union died. Had Rasputin not been revived by the black cultists after the breach, it is quite possible that it would have been lost to history for good, as the only person who had access to the island no longer had a corporeal body. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Flamel pointed at himself. What Cachet and Rasputin did not know is that I am also a secret keeper for this island. You are probably all familiar with the story of Cachet. Suffice it to say that since I was a relic from Cachet's time, a 15th century grand mugwump who had learned of the secret from his predecessors, in a direct chain of communication to Olga Kasheva, invited me to go to Bouillon as a consultant so we could hunt for Cachet's Horcrux. We never found it, of course. However, that was without modern technology. And now that I have outlived Grand Mugwump Chen, it is up to me to warn the world about this new threat. Here is what we are going to do. After we adjourn this meeting, you will be assigned into divisions, and your division leader will brief you on your individual missions in case we do have to assault Bouillon. Hopefully, we will not have to do this. Everyone here agrees that assaulting Bouillon is going to be extremely expensive, and the body count is going to be high. To that end, we have asked the Muggles to make the first move. Flamel waved his wand in the air, and the ghostly image of an odd-looking aircraft hovered over his head. The aircraft you see above me is an American B-2 bomber, also known as a stealth bomber. This Muggle vehicle is extremely difficult to detect, and it can carry tens of thousands of kilos worth of bombs. While we organize our forces, the Muggle air units will fly one of these planes over to Bouillon and drop its entire payload of bombs on it. Officials plan to drop explosive devices on every square meter of that island they can reach. This will almost certainly destroy everybody on Bouillon. If everything goes as planned, and the spotters report that the Black Fist members have all been destroyed, we will go to the island, find Cachet's Horcrux, and destroy it once and for all. If we find Rasputin's as well, we'll destroy it as well. You will get to visit what is left of this island in relative safety, and may participate in an expedition which will rid the world of a major dark wizard. Flamel's tone grew somber. If, on the other hand, the bomber is destroyed, or the bombs don't do enough damage to kill everyone, then a ground assault will be ordered. The odds of the bomber's destruction are pretty low, as the aircraft is black, will be flying without running lights, and will almost certainly not be visible from Bouillon. However, we have to assume that Rasputin and his men have been organizing the defense of the island. We have reason to believe that they've been there for a week at least, and that's a lot of time to prepare, especially when no one knows where you are. This assault will be costly, and I freely admit it. For the Muggles among you, think of D-Day with wizards. Flamel paused one last time, then drew a deep breath. At present, we have no plans to use nuclear weapons in this battle. Although we are almost certain that a nuke will destroy most of the people on the island and win the day for us, the world is still reeling after the events of Judgment Day. We do not want to open that can of worms again. However, it is my pleasure to inform you that Atlantis will be helping us out. Several people here have Atlantis rings, and they will be instrumental in protecting their colleagues from enemy attack. Be advised that since we are at DEFCON 2, their role must be defensive only. Hermione blinked and stared at her pocket, which had the ring in it. Was she going to be in the vanguard? Yikes. Flamel continued. We will also have the elves of Britain on our side as well. As you are aware, elves have their own special type of magic. Now that many elves burdened with harsh masters have won their freedom through the work of the Society for Preservation of Intelligent Welfare, we at the Ministry and Atlantis have invited them to work for us and join us in our crusade. Many of them, I am happy to admit, have accepted. And most of those who have joined want to avenge themselves on somebody. Hermione gawked at him. Was this good or bad? Spill's work now allowed the elves to effectively choose between a harsh master and Atlantis. However, was Atlantis any better if they were going to be sending elves on military missions which could get them killed? Why was everything this complicated? Flamel nodded. That's all for now. Let's all pause for a moment of silence and prayer before we get your own unit's briefings underway. Hermione tried to calm herself with Buddhist meditation practices. It took a few seconds to calm herself down, but eventually she began to focus on the thoughts and began telling herself, these stressful feelings are impermanent, just like everything else. Chapter 485. The Final Battle Begins. 0055Z Tuesday, December 31, 1996, Beach Area by an Atlantis DEFCON status. 252% next up. B2 versus Dome. 5. Grigory Rasputin watched as the last group of Black Fist operatives landed on the beach in the south-central part of Bouillon. There were now approximately 1,500 agents on the island, with a good 100 or so still in transit, or not bothering to come at all. Ideally, the Mad Monk would have waited to make sure everyone was there before he started raising the island's final defenses. Unfortunately, he was running out of time. He couldn't wait for everyone to show up, and it was getting close to the time he had planned to bring back Kache. It wasn't up to his followers to question his orders. They were supposed to be at the new safe house by midnight, and if they weren't there, so be it. Clearing centuries' worth of rampant tree growth out of the way with his wand, he led his small army up the eastern hill on the island, into what were once the ruins of the Roman fort on top of the hill. They were ruins no longer, however. The various pieces of stone and concrete had been transfigured and mutated into a modern fort which Rasputin hoped would be capable of withstanding an army chock-full of wizards. Granted, it was unlikely that the Atlanteans would interfere. However, Rasputin couldn't help but worry that the inability to capture Flamel and his wife could have left the door open for Atlantis to come to Bouillon. He told his colleagues to put up various magical defenses as he thought through the complicated ritual required to bring back Kache. The powerful medieval wizard had apparently managed to cast a spell which automatically imbued the gatekeeper with the tools required to bring him back, which was a good thing. Unfortunately, as far as Rasputin could tell, it would take a good 7 hours or so of uninterrupted concentration and rune drawing to set up the construct necessary to bring him back. Once he started on the ritual, he could not allow himself to be disturbed for any reason, or he'd have to do it all over again from scratch. Zyganov would be in charge of the wizarding defense of the island once Rasputin began working on the ritual. Borodin, one of the newly upgraded half-vampire Muggles, would be in charge of the Muggle defense. Both men were experts at what they did, and Rasputin was convinced that they would be able to hold off the Muggle forces long enough for Rasputin to complete the ritual. These weren't exactly the best conditions to fight under. It was cloudy right now, with occasional stars visible through breaks in the clouds. If the enemy attacked during the night, there wouldn't be any stars for the attackers to occult with their brooms. It was quite possible, in fact, that they could attack under complete surprise. Rasputin still had something to say about that, however. The thick tree cover would mean that could be snipers around every trunk. People would be easy to track thanks to the snow on the ground, which would make even invisibility not a sure thing. Invisible people still made footprints, after all. To make matters worse, the forecast was for rain to start in the mid-afternoon and change to snow and sleet during the night. Only an idiot would fight a major battle in the middle of a snowstorm in a forest. Unfortunately, Rasputin didn't have much of a choice. It was obvious Atlantis was onto him, as they may have already held Zhukov and Vovchenkaya. He needed to do this as soon as possible, before Atlantis figured out what was going on. Rasputin was excited, and he was not the only one. Most of the Black Guard cultists were amazed that they were actually standing on Buyan, an island which didn't exist as far as the world was concerned. Many of them were imagining what they would do when they had the world at their feet. Rasputin let them fantasize, of course. In practice, however, Koshe wasn't a god. He couldn't fix everything, and even if the Black Fist organization did become masters of the world, individual operatives would likely have their dreams thwarted by reality, Koshe's orders, or Atlantis. He couldn't say anything because high morale would be useful at a time like this. Rasputin made his way into what used to be the fort's main hall and began to speak. "All right, my friends. The time has come for me to start work on the ritual. Whatever you do, make sure if there is any interference, you deal with it. I'm going to get rather irritated if you interrupt midway through the ritual and force me to restart it all over again." Zyganov put his hand on Rasputin's shoulder. "We will do our best, my lord. You can count on us." Rasputin smiled and lifted the Elder Wand. "Good. And now let me put the finishing touches on our defenses courtesy of the Elder Wand. Yes, my friends, this is the infamous Elder Wand. It is unbeatable, and I plan to relinquish control of it to Koshe when he comes back. In the meantime, though, I can use it to cast spells which would be far beyond those of ordinary human beings. Watch this." He thrust the Elder Wand into the sky and shouted, "Pratigo Maximus Domus." There was a thunderclap which probably could have been heard in Istanbul. Rasputin's ears rang. He hadn't anticipated the amount of energy that would be released by the Elder Wand fired at maximum power. Several Muggles complained that the circuits on their weapons had blown out. Fortunately, however, the simpler weapons still worked. It was unlikely they would need their weapons, particularly now that a huge dome was covering virtually the entire island. Normally, domes 15 miles across would have been difficult to establish without the work of several wizards from Atlantis. This was not the case here. Rasputin added a Portkey barrier around the island, something he thought would come in quite handy given recent events. Satisfied with what he had done, he put the wand back in his pocket and began working on the runes. He had barely started writing the first rune when the Elder Wand suddenly flew out of his robe and was replaced by someone else's wand. "Shit," he thought. Someone had just disarmed him and taken control of the Elder Wand. He should have known this would happen. Judging from the exclamation of joy about 100 feet behind him, the wand's new master was a woman, and Rasputin now held her old wand. The woman's elation didn't last long, as another Expelliarmus shattered the silence. This was followed by a third and a fourth. Soon, small duels were breaking out all over the fortress. Rasputin groaned inwardly to himself. Just what we need right now. A few hundred black fist wizards fighting over the Elder Wand instead of concentrating on Kashe, or at least getting some sleep. He hoped that the rest of this operation would go more smoothly when he heard the enormous thunderclap. Sebastian Orlov threw himself on the ground by reflex, completely sinking into snow and fallen leaves. After a minute of complete silence, his enchanced hearing picked up his squadmates moving around, then standing up. "That was damn magic, I say. Look, it even ruined my rifle's red dart," complained one of the cultists. Sebastian checked his own weapons true enough. Electricity was gone, but with half-vampiric eyesight, their aim would hopefully still be sufficient should hostiles came to fight them. Sidearms and melee weapons. Even half-vampires with no experience with these got a sword or axe. Their newfound abilities made this option too lethal to pass up. Their wireless comm unit was, surprisingly enough, working with some interference then again. It was based off the wizarding wireless. It made sense if it was magic-resistant. Now, to see whether the higher-ups knew what it was about. "Commander Borodin, sir. 5th Squad requesting orders, standing by." The calm voice of their superior came into line moments later. "Borodin to all perimeter units. The thunderclap was a friendly spell. I repeat, friendly spell. No hostiles contacted. Continue assuming your designated positions. Be ready for incoming hostiles. May the Black Guard keep your wits sharp and your hands steady. Over." However, enhanced hearing wasn't always an improvement, all things considered. "Am I the only one who heard wizards quarreling in the background, guys?" asked one of the half-vampires. Orlov sighed. He suspected the cause of the wizard mayhem. The artifact wand Rasputin used to heal his scars to test it. "Shut up, all of you. It's wizard business, and we ain't no wizards. Grab your stuff and get going to the valley. And don't forget to pray to T. Chernobog for some wind when you thank him for good news." "Good news?" asked one of his brethren. "Indeed," he smiled. "Though Círdan isn't coming, it's because they keep Nestor busy. No Vila will come here tonight." "Since when is that good news?" asked the guy. "I always wanted to see them Vilas. Heard they are so beautiful you'd never look at human women the same as before." "Trust me," growled Orlov. "You don't want to see them as hostiles. Fireball-throwing flyers and mental domination." Here he shuddered, even though his memories of the incident were blissfully muted. "Don't sound so good when you're on their wrong side." Merpeople Assembly, Chamber Octorattle. The elder of House Zace yelled at the eldest, voicing the thoughts of a significant part of the amphibian species. "We can't stand idly while those tricksters and babysnathers get more and more privileges. With all due respect, sir, this city has had its trustworthy wizards for thousands of years. There's no reason to stop relying on them." Arcana Vernus Eye of Trapananda, on his newly established place at the eldest's right side, face-palmed. The more primitive tribes have mostly kept their mouths shut so far, but he wasn't naive enough to attribute it to gratitude for their uplifting, the effects of which were already visible instead of fear. Perhaps in a few generations, with wizards of their own blood living among them, there would be trust. But for now, all they achieved was the silent submission of the 1,000 tribes and the watchful eye of Roctorattle. "Gentlemen," softly began the eldest, and all others became silent. "You are too hard on this young man." Avernus resisted the urge to roll his eyes at the patronizing tone. "He and his followers did a very brave thing, coming out of hiding to help us, discarding 5,000 years of tradition for the sake of doing the right thing. You should not condemn them for the sins of their predecessors. Still, as we all know, a single support is often too unstable to bear a weight. And even with their impressive command on magic, our new brothers and sisters don't have the power nor the desire to lead us alone in any way. Those fearing that their gifted children would be taught to despise their Muggle parents should therefore be relieved to learn that Rattle also opens schools for merpeople of all ages with magical talent. The Archon looked like he has eaten something bitter. Consult my aide about the details of. He fell silent as a glowing ethereal squid materialized near the Archon and spoke with a woman's voice. My lord, I've just heard the news. Atlantis is going to war, and they request our help. The battle will start in a few hours. I humbly suggest you gather our best and most trusted available battle mages and send them to Atlantis for a briefing as soon as possible. I'm waiting for your answer. The Archon reached for his wand, but stopped as he felt the eldest's hand on his arm. You're not alone in this, said the old one. It's time to show the world we merpeople stand as one. The wizard shook his head. I appreciate the thought, but this is a war of wizards. It's our duty to ensure the safety of normal people, not to let them walk into deadly danger with us. The Lord of Rattle smirked. Who said anything about normal people? 0100 Zomeware over Europe. United States Air Force Captain Chase, Chevy. Dunham could not believe he was actually going to be flying a stealth bomber into combat. He had always wanted to fly one of these things. It looked so cool, after all. He had been a bit nervous at first when he saw all of the dials and gizmos and HUDs he'd have to deal with while flying the plane. Fortunately, he'd done well enough on the tests to become a candidate for the mission, and he'd had enough luck to win the lottery as to which pilot would actually attack Booyan. His aircraft was loaded to the gills with the heaviest conventional bombs the Air Force could call up on short notice. If everything went as planned, he was less than an hour away from dropping a whole arsenal on an island which he hadn't known existed a few hours earlier. He would be releasing the weapons far enough away from the target to be safe, yet near enough for the GPS homing beacons to reach the desired latitude and longitude, where they would explode on contact with the ground. And they would explode with enough oomph to level everything in the area. Given that the plan was for them to carpet bomb the island, there was no way that the Black Fist personnel would be able to hide from this attack. Dunham would then fly over the island, where he would report on the results of the attack. Presumably, the entire place would be on fire and torn to shreds. With a launching point far away and the plane invisible to radar, this should be easy. The wizard in the co-pilot's seat would then cast Revelio Hominum and check to see if there was anyone left down there. If there were no survivors, a mission would immediately set out for Booyan, and wizards would come ashore looking for Rasputin's Horcrux, Kashe's Horcrux, or both. Any Horcruxes discovered would eventually be dispatched with the Sword of Gryffindor, a British artifact which had been brought along by the famous British witch Hermione Granger. The problem, of course, was that the bad guys had magic as well. He didn't know of anything which would be able to detect him a few hundred miles away, particularly when it was raining ordnance. However, it was obvious magic could do things he had always thought impossible. The stealth was being accompanied by two small escort fighters crewed by a combination of a wizard and a Muggle. Dunham's mission was to focus on the island and only the island. Any threats to him or his squadron would be dealt with by the escorts. He watched as his HUD counted down the distance to the target. Less than half an hour was left until showtime. -0116 Zuran/Iraq border. It hadn't taken long for the Atlantean wizards to knock out the Muggle defenses separating the two countries. Soon, the Iranian armed forces were making their way into Iraq. Reports from the south indicated that the Saudis were making good progress as well. The goal they had agreed on was to get rid of the wizards and restore Iraq to its Muggle rulers. That was easy enough to live with. Now, of course, if it became necessary to leave a few Iranian regiments behind to make sure the wizards came back, they'd do that too. 0119 Baghdad. A good 3 city blocks of the city were on fire. Purple fire. People were running everywhere as multicolored beams crisscrossed the sky, followed by hails of bullets. More often than not, the beams bounced off improvised shields or crashed into the walls of buildings, knocking them down one at a time. Urban warfare was never pretty. This looked to be Operation Desert Storm all over again. Unfortunately, at least at this point it seemed the bad guys were winning. The Death Eaters had planned very well, and for the time being their central stronghold in Baghdad appeared to be impregnable. Hopefully that would change. There had been a brief moment of tension when Iranian forces suddenly found themselves working with Mossad agents. A few angry words were bandied back and forth. However, the two sides eventually agreed to bury the hatchet for now and deal with a much more pressing issue. Crises like this made strange bedfellows. 0136Z Tuesday, December 31, 1996, Eastern Mountain Bayan Atlantis DEFCON status. 252% next up. A dangerous escalation. 8. Genya Zyganov spun in astonishment as the caterwauling charm went off. His surprise was twofold. First, that something was actually approaching Buyin, and second, that he had been able to hear the alarm over the sound of the dueling Black Guard cultists. Shit, he thought. Either we've got a malfunctioning spell or Atlantis has figured out how to get to Buyin. In either case, we're in trouble. Fortunately, they had time to prepare. The alarm had been set to trigger 20 miles or so from the island, which meant that the invaders still had a while to go to before they actually became a problem. He had to reorganize the troops quickly. He had no idea who currently held the Elder Wand, and for the moment he didn't care. All he was concerned about was giving Black Fist the ability to meet this possible intruder. He amplified his voice and bellowed at everyone to stop fighting. Much to his amazement, a good half of them obeyed. Unfortunately, that still left a good 300 wizards or so duking it out over control of the Elder Wand. He fumed when he saw that several wizards were already dead, killed by their own colleagues without even Rasputin's help. Incensed, he began to launch into a tirade which would hopefully bring everyone back to their senses. He had scarcely opened his mouth when the 5-mile caterwauling charm went off. Doing some quick math in his head, he realized that whatever it was coming in very, very fast. He doubted even Portkeys traveled at that speed, and he wasn't even sure Muggle aircraft could do it. What on earth could it be? He turned to look at Rasputin, but Rasputin was still busy with his runes and could not be disturbed. His gut feeling was that it was a mistake of some sort, a problem with both spells. True, that was unlikely, but... Then all hell broke loose. Several tremendous explosions suddenly blossomed on the far side of the island, the side nearest Romania. The earth shook as nearly invisible objects crashed into Rasputin's dome and let loose with unimaginable fury. The dueling wizards stopped what they were doing and stared in amazement at the fireworks on the other side. Zyganov didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. He was troubled by the fact that the Atlanteans, or at least the Muggles, had discovered Buyin. On the other hand, he was happy that the shield was powerful enough to deflect these powerful explosives. His mind raced, and he frantically tried to figure out what was attacking them. It had to be a series of Muggle missiles or bombs, probably launched from a submarine or an airplane. If that was the case, the attacking vehicle was likely nearby. He told everyone to scan the skies, as the explosions continued on the other side of the island. The Black First agents promptly reported that they couldn't see much because the clouds were in the way. Others complained they had lost their night vision. Shit, he should have figured they would try an attack like this, particularly if the attackers were hidden by the clouds. The only problem with this theory was the simple fact that the attackers couldn't see what they were. His wife suddenly shrieked and pointed at the western side of the island. Everyone, take cover. The shield is starting to weaken. Zyganov glanced back at the attack site and saw to his horror that his wife was right. The shield was beginning to fluctuate, which was not a good sign. Hopefully the attack would let up soon, but it didn't seem to be cooperating. The bombs continued streaming into the western side of the island as Zyganov shouted, "Those of you tasked to guard Rasputin, stay here. Everyone else, scatter and start casting shield charms in that direction. We don't want to be around if that dome." There was a final flash of light, and the dome disappeared. Within seconds, the explosions began detonating all over the island, focusing on areas near the mountaintops and Zyganov's men. The next 20 seconds or so were absolute hell as the bombs began to fall within 200 feet of the Black Fist encampment. Tree limbs and shrapnel flew everywhere, and at least 100 wizards fell to the ground, clutching themselves in pain. The sound was absolutely deafening, and Zyganov had his hands midway to his ears when a piece of trunk maybe 3 inches wide suddenly sliced through his left arm, cutting it off at the wrist. Someone screamed, and it took Zyganov a second to realize that it was him. One glance at his arm told him immediately that this was a fatal blow. He couldn't believe that it would end like this, so close. Suddenly his eyes widened. The elixir of life. Each cultist had been given a dose of the elixir of life. Blackguard, please make it that the vial was still intact. Rasputin had told him it was unbreakable, but would the spell hold up to such an attack? He was already starting to fall into shock. Barely able to concentrate enough to remember what he was doing, he reached into his robe with his good hand and pulled out the vial of elixir. He poured the potion down his throat as he took shelter behind a tree. The potion's effects astonished him. The pain stopped almost immediately, and his severed hand quickly started to grow back. Within 10 seconds, it was as if he had never been injured. He had survived, at least for now. The bombs continued to come in. Oddly enough, they were all focused on the same point for the most part, about 500 feet away from the mountaintop. He didn't know why exactly they were targeting over there. Nothing was there, after all. Maybe they were having targeting problems because they couldn't see through the clouds. Thank the Blackguard for this miserable aim. Figuring it was only a matter of time until the enemy realized their aim was off, he reached for his wand, only to find that the shock waves from the explosions and the buffeting had thrown it from his robe. He had to scrabble through the snow for a good 10 seconds before he found it, praying the whole time that he would make it through this raid. Suddenly, without warning, the bombs stopped falling and the night was peaceful once again. However, it was no longer silent as cultists were strewn all over the area, screaming in pain and shock. Zyganov saw at least 100 people down, unmoving. A good 200 had been forced to use their elixir of life to keep themselves going, just like he had. The fact that he had been able to see well at all was due to another, equally disturbing development. All of the bombs had set part of the forest on fire. Flames licked at trees 400 feet from him or less, and he was concerned a little that the entire island would be consumed. Fortunately, the snow slowly began to quench the fire. It took a good 2 or 3 minutes, but several of the uninjured wizards eventually managed to put it out completely. Rasputin suddenly appeared behind him, and Zyganov's eyes widened. "My lord, you should go back to your runes." Rasputin shook his head. "It's too late for that now, Genya. We have to get away from these mountaintops. It's obvious that one of the Flamels told Atlantis we're over here, and they're going to do everything in their power to stop us. You do know why we have to get away from the mountaintops, right?" Zyganov nodded. "Yes, my lord. If you're a Muggle tactician with a map of the island, the first places you go after would be obvious high points, particularly above the tree line where you can see forever." "Correct. I want everyone to head further down the mountain into the valley between the two hills, as far away from the beach as possible. We'll reorganize our defenses down there, and I'll start with the runes once more. We'll leave skeleton crews on the mountains to see if anyone makes it onto the island some other way." "Fair enough, my lord." Rasputin looked out over the rest of the cultists. "Good God, we've got at least 100 people down in one attack. What was it?" "I believe a Muggle aircraft attacked us with missiles or bombs. Your dome held back a few of them, but eventually they overwhelmed the dome and made it in. We were very lucky that they were off target. Rasputin thought for a moment, then nodded. Actually, it's not that unexpected. I suspect they only have Nicholas Flamel's old map of the island, and you know how inaccurate old maps tended to be. Remember, they haven't been here yet to get a real look at the terrain. Unless I'm badly mistaken, those missiles were aimed at where they thought the two peaks were. They were slightly off, just enough for us to come out of here with only 100 dead. Zyganov winced. We won't be able to handle many more attacks like this, my lord. What I recommend doing is reconstructing the dome, and doing so before the Atlanteans figure out that they've killed a lot of our men. The fact that we've put out the fire near us will work to our advantage. If whoever owns the Elder Wand puts the dome back, we just may be able to convince our attacker that their raid didn't do any damage. Rasputin grunted. I don't see how that's possible. They'll look down and see the flattened trees. I don't think so, my lord. Remember, it's cloudy. If they stay above the clouds, they won't be able to see anything. And if they venture below the clouds, we'll be ready for them. Rasputin hesitated a minute, then nodded. Sounds reasonable. All right, let's start cleaning things up. I want everyone who's still injured and able to walk to apparate over to the cave with the elixir storage. As long as you don't try to get off the island, you'll be fine. There, they are to heal their injuries and get a new dose of elixir. Half-vampires should not take advantage of the elixir unless it is a life-and-death situation. Recall, they lose their abilities. Zyganov nodded approvingly. Sound thinking, my lord. Thank you, and tell everyone to reconstruct that dome as soon as possible. And this time, start casting Protego spells in whichever direction the caterwauling charm indicates any future attacks are coming from. If we're lucky, concentrate all of the magical energy in one direction will likely generate a stronger shield than if we try to spread it equally all around the island. Within half an hour, all of the surviving Blackguard cultists had been healed, and the owner of the Elder Wand had relinquished the wand to Zyganov. There were now not one but two Elder Wand-created domes over the island, one created by Zyganov and one created by the previous owner of the Elder Wand. The island was now even better prepared for an enemy attack, now that Rasputin's men knew that the Atlanteans knew where Buyan was. The final casualty total was 121 dead in the bombing raid. 41 half-vampires reverted back to human form due to consumption of the elixir of life. 2 half-vampires evolved to full vampire after failing to resist the temptation for blood, and no fewer than 260 at least partially injured. The attack had been costly, but the Rasputinites had learned their lesson and would be ready next time. -0219 Zephyr above Buyan. The wizard in Dunham's bomber grunted. "Uh-oh." Dunham turned to him with a bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. "Uh-oh what?" The wizard pointed at the ground. "We've got at least 1,300 people down there. There is evidence of damage to both mountains, but not enough to kill the enemy. Most of them seem to be concentrated in the valley between the mountains." Dunham got immediately. They figured we'd go for the mountaintops, because that's what a normal defensive commander would do. Exactly, so they went for reverse psychology. This is problematic. They now know we're onto them, and they've done something quite rash which could make things a bit trickier in the long run. "Oh, what's that?" The wizard pointed out the window at the cloud deck, illuminated faintly form below by what appeared to be flames from burning tracts of forest. "You see that faint twinkling just above the clouds?" Dunham nodded. "I do. I figured that was just stars or something like that." The wizard blinked at him. "Stars between us and the clouds. Nope. What I believe you are seeing is a magical defense shield. They've put up a shield to make sure we can't get through again." Dunham whistled. "That's not good. Can we overwhelm it with bombs?" "Possibly. However, you have to keep in mind that they know we're coming now. They'll be watching out for us now, and will try destroying us if they see us. At the very least, they'll cast spells at anything even before our weapons make it to the shield." Dunham grunted. "What do we do?" Nothing right now. All I can recommend is report back to base and tell them what's happened. If I were HQ, I'd go after them again, either with another B-2 or with some tomahawks. And I sincerely hope it's enough to make it though the shield. Makes sense. And if that doesn't work, if the shield is able to keep bombs out. The wizard bit his lip. We'll have to go underneath the shield, or through it on the strength of Atlantis bubbles. You have to understand that the Protego Dome spell is designed to work with Atlantis bubbles. The two shields will merge and let the wizards with the bubbles through. That means a ground assault. Dunham groaned. A ground assault on a stronghold with up to 1,300 wizards defending it. That's going to be expensive. The wizard sighed. Tell me about it. Z. White House, Washington. Deke United States of America Atlantis DEFCON status. 254%. Bill Clinton was still in the Oval Office after a long day of work. Being president wasn't easy, he mused. Sometimes he wondered why he had decided to run for re-election in the first place. He had thought running the country had been difficult even before the world had found out about the wizards. Now, of course, it had gotten infinitely more complicated. He had no experience trying to tell wizards what to do, and he still didn't know what exactly an enemy wizard would try to do to his nation. Were all of them as powerful as Voldemort, or was Voldemort an exception? The latest reports on Iraq weren't encouraging. Voldemort's rejuvenated Death Eater movement had entrenched itself in Baghdad and was proving extremely difficult to dislodge. Supposedly, the Death Eaters had taken a few civilians hostage and were threatening to kill them unless the Atlantis forces backed off. The city, already ravaged by the First Gulf War, was now in the throes of anarchy and urban warfare. The only good news was that the invasions from Saudi Arabia and Iran had at least managed to distract the Death Eater forces in other parts of the country from going to the assistance of their brethren in the capital. It was now about 9:30 p.m., and he had just heard a report from the Bouillon front claiming that the stealth bomber raid had struck the island but had done so off-target, and as a result left a lot of people alive. Radar imaging provided by the bombers had revealed the explanation. Nicholas Flamel's 15th century map, the only clue the Americans had had as to the island's configuration, had been inaccurate, and the enemy had anticipated that the bomber would attack the mountaintops. Fortunately, the Americans would not have to make that mistake again. It didn't take long for the United Nations' Security Council's conference call to come in. Within 2 minutes, all 5 nations were represented, and the meeting began. Due to the urgency of the situation, they didn't even bother with the traditional pleasantries before getting started. It had been unanimously agreed that the council expand to 6 members, adding the wizarding ambassador to the traditional mix of the United States, Russia, China, France, and Britain. Atlantis spoke first. Gentlemen, good evening. Here is the latest update on the fight against the Dark Wizards. Iraq is still at a standstill, and we're about to send in a few wizards equipped with Atlantis bubbles to try to clear things out. The 1st Division of the Wizarding Standing Army is doing an admirable job keeping things in line, but we're going to need more manpower to turn the tide. We probably have enough forces deployed right now to deal with either Bouillon or Iraq, but not both. The Chinese diplomat asked, "Don't you have 2 of them? What's the 2nd Division doing?" The Briton answered that they're destined for Bouillon. They were waiting to see whether the B-2 raid would finish off the wizards without forcing us to revert to a ground assault. Unfortunately, that does not appear to have been the case. Clinton winced. He's right, unfortunately. It appears that the map we had for Bouillon was inaccurate, which should have been expected with medieval cartography. We've got a more accurate map now, however, thanks to the flyover. In addition, the Rasputinites anticipated we'd go after the high ground and seem to have congregated in the valley instead. China, how many people are down there? Atlantis hesitated before responding. The spotter claims there are at least 1,300 people down there. The rest of the Security Council members swore as Clinton asked, "Are they all wizards, Or are they both wizards and muggles? We don't know at this point, Mr. President. The spell only detects living people. It doesn't say if they're wizards or muggles. We should probably assume the worst-case scenario. Maybe 1,200 wizards and 100 muggles with very advanced weaponry. France, did the spotter see any evidence of damage on the island? What about wizard defenses? Clinton answered this. They couldn't see the surface very well because of the cloud cover. However, they saw evidence that several parts of the island were on fire. As far as the defenses go, one of the spotters claimed that there was a magical shield surrounding the island. I suspect they put the shield up shortly after the attack. Once they realized, we know they're there. Dialynis, I don't like this. Was there evidence of one shield or two? Britain, why does that matter, Ambassador? Dialynis, because two shields can be maintained indefinitely by recreating an inner shield whenever the outer shield is wavering. With two shields, there will always be at least one shield up, even if the outer shield falls before the inner shield is recast. As long as there is room inside the inner shield to make a new one and protect all of the defenders, they can just wait us out. If there are two shields up, we're going to need a ground assault or a nuclear weapon. The British representative swore once again. We can't allow a stalemate, because if we do so, they're going to bring Karshay back. In this case, the tie goes to Rasputin. Clinton breathed a sigh of relief. They claim they only saw one shield. Would they have been able to see both if they were there? Dialynis, I believe so, Mr. President. All right, here's what we can do. We need to figure out if our weapons can get through the shield. Are there any other B-2 bombers ready for a mission? Clinton, no. However, we've got units which can launch Tomahawk missiles in the area. Is there a way you can hack a missile so that it tracks Rasputin? Dialynis, possibly, but we don't know how, and we don't have time to figure it out at the moment. Looks like you muggles are going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. -0352 Zebuyan Rasputin was getting tired. However, he couldn't rest very long, or the runes he was working on would lose their power. At one point, someone had been forced to hand him a pick-me-up potion in one hand while he wrote intricate symbols with the other. It had been a gamble, but it had worked. There were still about 5 hours left for him to finish the construct. He really hoped he could stay up the whole time. Suddenly, the caterwauling charm went off once more. All eyes turned to the mountaintops, and people brought out their wands. Rasputin turned back to his work as Zyganov told everyone to get ready. Zyganov thought he caught a glimpse of a cluster of grey streaks heading in their direction, all spouting fire from their tails. They seemed to be missiles, probably launched by ship, and much to his chagrin, he saw they were targeting the center of the island. Hopefully, the shield would hold. The objects slammed into the shield and exploded. They weren't as powerful as the first set of explosions, but there were sure a lot of them. And sure enough, it was only a matter of time until the front shield began to waver. Hoping he had enough strength to produce another shield, he constructed another dome inside the inner dome and managed to bring it up just as the outermost shield conked out. The missiles promptly began pummeling the second shield, which was now on the outside. Exhausted, he told someone else to disarm him, take the Elder Wand, and construct a third shell inside the one Zyganov had just created if the original second shell failed. It didn't take long for the wizards to realize what they were planning. The Elder Wand, fought over so viciously a few hours earlier, was handed from wizard to wizard as they each took turns putting up replacement shields. Eventually, the half-vampires took over the bulk of the shield generation due to their unusual stamina. It took a good 6 or 7 shields to get the job done, and the eventual final line of defense had left a good half-mile of the island undefended as the various barriers had retreated. However, they did what they had to. They had fended off the latest assault and were confident that they would be able to ward off any others. The only problem was that Rasputin had broken off his rune, writing to come on over and check on everyone. It would now take 7 more hours for Karshay to come back. This time, however, the Black Fist agents were certain no one would interfere unless they tried a ground assault. And they couldn't imagine any way a ground assault would be any more effective than the air assault. They had time to kill, and soon the world would be theirs. -0500 Z White House. The world leaders listened in dismay as Clinton issued his final report. The latest spotter planes have confirmed that there are now at least 2 shields surrounding the majority of the island. It appears that Rasputin's men have realized that a double shield will ward off all future attacks, at least from the air. There is no additional damage to the center of the island. Dialanis, you're saying that majority of the island is covered. Let me guess. They gave up part of the island in order to implement the retreating shield tactic when the tomahawks came in. That's what it looks like, Ambassador. We may have a place to launch a ground assault from. The question is whether we'll be able to get through the shield at ground level. Dialanis sounded hopeful. It's possible. I suspect that the Atlantis bubbles will temporarily disrupt the dome and allow people to pass through. People can remove their rings outside the dome, let someone stand next to them, and put the ring back on so it includes both of them. That way, they'll be able to shuttle people into the area, where they'll be picked off immediately. The hope drained from Dialanis's voice. We can only try, however. If we bring in Marines with hand grenades and so forth, we can have them launch them at the enemy. From inside the Atlantis bubbles, I didn't think anything could pass through in either direction. The Chinese representative offered a suggestion. How about transfiguring people into blades of grass which are plucked, so to speak, and brought by the ring bearer into the dome? The wizard drops them on the ground and then leaves the area. He then goes back onto the other side as the people resume their normal forms and start attacking. Dialanis, that's possible. However, someone is going to have to figure out how to transfigure the wizard's back and do so without penetrating the shield. I'm almost thinking we should go underground. The British ambassador coughed for a moment. Gentlemen, we have to consider all possibilities here. From what you are telling us, a ground assault is going to be extremely difficult, and even if we do penetrate the dome, we're probably going to be mowed under. An air assault may also be out of the question. This may leave only one option, as distasteful as it is in the light of recent events. We need something powerful enough to destroy the shields and ensure that the wizards won't be able to bring them back. Ideally, we need something that would destroy everything in the area, so we don't have to risk a frontal assault. There was dead silence as people slowly understood what he was referring to. Finally, Clinton let it out. Good God, are you asking for what I think you're asking? The Briton's answer was terse. Yes, tactical nuke, center of island, the end. The Russian nearly exploded. What the hell are you thinking? You realize what happened 6 months ago. Do you want to let the cat out of the bag again? The Briton's voice turned frosty. I know, sir, believe me, I know. Look what Voldemort did to. Dialanis cut in. I don't like the idea of using a nuke, to be honest. However, it may very well be our only option. If anything, a nuke will likely be powerful enough both to destroy Kosh and his Horcrux, particularly if it's big enough to decimate the island. He paused for a moment and let it sink in. I recommend that we at least grant our members the authority to use a nuke as a last resort, and only a last resort if the ground assault fails. There was a brief hesitation. Eventually, the rest of the Security Council agreed to this proposal. Clinton, however, had one reservation. What happens if we can't get our friendlies off the island before we deploy? Dialanis's voice was sad. We let them make the call. If the men on the ground think they can do it without nuclear assistance, we leave it to them. If, however, they believe there is no option but to use the weapon, so be it. Clinton pressed him. You're willing to sacrifice the friendlies? Yes, Mr. President. Kashe was a major threat to civilization, possibly even more dangerous than Voldemort, considering that he did what he did 600 years ago. And keep in mind that if things do escalate, There is no judgment day to fall back on. Remember, we can only use that once every 5 years. The Russian spoke. Which way is the wind blowing down there? Clinton bit his lip. It's coming out of the south-southeast. The Frenchman swore. It's going to rain fallout all over the Romanian coast. I don't like this idea. Besides, it sets a bad precedent. Dionysus interrupted smoothly. We'll have everyone we can spare create a rainstorm and precipitate the fallout before it reaches the coast, just like we did in Ogdensburg and New York. The discussion continued for a few more moments. However, it was obvious what the decision had to be. Kashey was too dangerous to be kept alive. There was no judgment day to fall back on, and even the Grand Mugwump wasn't convinced a ground assault was going to work. Furthermore, if one or both of the Horcruxes was under a Fidelius, it could very well take a nuclear explosion to destroy it. They had to make sure that Kashey never got off the island, as once he did, that it would be almost impossible to track him down. This meant they had to catch him completely by surprise and not give him a chance to apparate out of there. Clinton drew a deep breath and committed himself. All right, gentlemen, we will have a 100 KT trident waiting for orders. God help us all if we are forced to use it.